With the release of the brand new pack Infinite Forbidden, this video is going to contain all the cards and a brief explanation of what they do and what their purpose is. Dragon of Pride and Soul is a dark attribute dragon type level 8 with 2500 attack and 2500 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned from your hand, or your opponent has 25 or more cards in their graveyard. While you have 25 or more cards in your graveyard, this card gains 2500 attack and defense. Like some of the other support that's recently come out, there was a previous one which was Spellcaster version, had exactly the same effect, but it's extremely situational. It requires to be summoned when your opponent has 25 or more cards in the graveyard, and you're going to have to force this type of decision. And it only gains its boosting ability if you have 25 or more cards in your graveyard. Potentially this could be a 5000 attack and defense monster, but there are monsters out there that can meet these types of conditions or better themselves without having to do this. This is more the symbolic version to mark the 25 years of the anime. For example, Chaos Armatile can boost itself to 10,000 attack points on its turn through its own effect, or you've even got Rainbow Dragon that's able to tribute over Crystal Beast cards to make it potentially an 11,000 attack monster. Sengenjin Awaits from a Millennium is an Earth Attribute Beast Warrior type level 8 with 2750 attack and 2500 defense. It cannot be destroyed by monster effects. You can only use each of the following effects of Sengenjin Awaits from Millennium once per turn. If this card is in your hand, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. While this card is a continuous spell, you can either pay 2,000 life points or reveal 1 Millennium Ankh in your hand. Special summon this card, then you can add 1 Millennium monster from your deck to your hand. This is the reincarnation version of Sengenjin, which was a normal monster, and this has been brought into line with an effect monster. It's interesting that it's actually holding the Millennium Shield as it's kind of angrily being aggressive. The effect itself, it cannot be destroyed by monster effects. It's quite a strange one because it's just a part of an effect. It's still affected by monster effects, so if it vanishes, returns it to the hand, sends it to the graveyard, any of those types of effects still treat and go against this card. It simply cannot be destroyed by those monster effects, so that is a very limited form of protection. Each of the effects is quite decent, as you're able to, when this card is in the hand, just place it in the spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell, and either by paying 2,000 life points or revealing it in the Millennium Ankh, you can just instantly special summon this card. So there isn't really any cost to it if you can just reveal the Millennium Ankh, or even if you're having to pay the 2,000 life points, there are ways within the deck that can support life point recovery. When this card is special summoned, you're able to add a Millennium monster from your deck to your hand, so it's a way of searching. It acts like a rotor for your Millennium deck. Golem that guards the Millennium Treasures is an Earth Attribute Rock type at level 6 with 2000 attack and 2200 defense. The activation of your name cannot negate it. You can only use each of the following effects of Golem that guards the Millennium Treasures once per turn. If this card is in your hand, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. While this card is a continuous spell, you can either pay 2,000 life points or reveal 1 Millennium Ankh in your hand. Special summon this card, then you can add 1 Wedgery Temple from your deck to your hand. This is another one of the cards that was Millennium Golem, and that was a normal monster. This has the exact same stats, attribute, and typing as that previous monster. It's just got an effect version. This prevents your Millennium Ankh from being negated, so that's a good way of providing some sort of protection. And when this card is in the spell and trap zone, just by either paying 2,000 life points or revealing a Millennium Ankh, you can instantly special summon this card. And the Wedgery Temple also helps to add to your consistency. When I briefly covered the Wedgery Temple, its effect essentially means that your Millennium monsters, instead of going to the graveyard, will go back to the continuous spell and trap zone, and in doing so, you can then trigger off their effects to then revive themselves, and it helps to cycle throughout the deck without having to add additional generic recovery cards. Shield of the Millennium Dynasty is a Earth Attribute Warrior type at level 5 with 0 attack and 3000 defense. It cannot be destroyed by spell or trap effects. You can only use each of the following effects of Shield of the Millennium Dynasty once per turn. If this card is in your hand, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. While this card is a continuous spell, you can either pay 2,000 life points or reveal 1 Millennium Ankh in your hand. Special summon this card, then you can add 1 Millennium Ankh from your deck to your hand. This one is protected from spell and trap effect, so it means when it is in the spell and trap zone, it's protected always. That's only whilst it's there. When it's actually been summoned, it's got no real forms of protection to it. by either paying the 2,000 life points or revealing the Millennium Mount. By special summoning this card, it has 3,000 defense points, so it's not going to be beaten too easily outside of your opponent changing this monster's battle position to attack position, and then you're just able to search for the Millennium Mount straight from the deck to hand, so that adds to consistency. Maiden of the Millennium Moon is a light attribute illusion effect monster. It's level 4 with 1,500 attack and 1,300 defense. If this card battles a monster, neither it can be destroyed by that battle. You can only use each of the following effects of Maiden of the Millennium Moon once per turn. If this card is in your hand, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. If your opponent activates a card or effect while this card is a continuous spell, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card. And if you do, for the rest of this turn, your opponent cannot target level 5 or higher illusion or spellcaster monsters you control with card effects. This card is the new version of the Maiden of the Moon, and it has the same stat lining for it, but this is an illusion monster, whereas I think that was a spellcaster monster. This has the first bit of its effect the same as most illusion monsters, that they cannot destroy a monster in battle, and they cannot be destroyed in battle. And in terms of the effects, when this card is in as a continuous spell, when your opponent activates a card effect, you're just able to instantly special summon this card, and it provides your higher level illusion and spellcaster monsters with protection from card effects, but they do have to be level 5 or higher. That's fine because you've got things like Dark Magician Girl, and some of the other monsters, the Diabell Star monsters, that meet these requirements, and it adds to some sort of protection for the decks. This can really be splashed into either illusion or spellcaster decks, as it doesn't have any reliance or requirement that you need to have a Millennium Ankh anywhere in the field or in the graveyard or within the deck. Fiend Reflection of the Millennium is a wind attribute illusion type level 4 with 1,300 attack and 1,400 defense. If this card battles a monster, neither can be destroyed by that battle. You can only use each of the following effects of Fiend Reflection of the Millennium once per turn. If this card is in your hand, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a continuous spell card. If your opponent activates a card or effect while this card is a continuous spell, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card, then you gain life points equal to half the attack of one monster on the field. The first part of this effect is the same as most illusion monsters, that whenever a battle is conducted with them involved, neither monster can be destroyed by that battle. And in terms of its effect, when this card is in the hand, you're just able to put it as a face-up continuous spell card, and if the opponent activates a card or effect whilst it's in the spell and trap zone, just special summon this card, and then you gain a life points equal to half of the attack of one monster on the field. You're going to be aiming for the highest monster on that field, therefore gaining half of those attack points as life points is necessary, as a lot of the archetype require life point costs, as in if you're not feeling the Millennium Ankh from your hand, then you are going to have to pay 2,000 life points to summon those cards. Dark Magician, the Magician of Black Magic, is a dark attribute spellcaster type level 7 with 2,500 attack and 2,100 defense. This card's name becomes Dark Magician while on the field. You can only use each of the following effects of Dark Magician, the Magician of Black Magic, once per turn. If Shining Sarcophagus is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is destroyed by a card effect and a level 5 or higher monster is on the field, you can special summon this card, then you can set one spell trap card from your deck that mentions Dark Magician. This is an alternative version of the original Dark Magician, and it's almost like if Yugi was to use it instead of Yami Yugi. It has the same stats as the original Dark Magician, but it's got an effect, and it treats itself as a Dark Magician whilst it's on the field. Keep that in mind, so wherever it is, it doesn't consider itself a Dark Magician unless it's on the field. And so long as you've got Shining Sarcophagus on the field, this card can instantly be special summoned. When this card is destroyed specifically by a card effect, and you have a level 5 or higher monster that's already on the field, most of the Millennium monsters meet these conditions, you're able to just then special summon this card and set a spell or trap card from your deck that mentions Dark Magician. So there's plenty of those cards. You know, you've got the ones that the continuous trap card, you've got the continuous spell card that does that, the Dark Magician Circle, you've got all these other support cards that work very intrinsically with Dark Magician, very easy to splash within the deck, and you can almost build a dedicated deck through using Shining Sarcophagus alongside the Dark Magicians. Gimmick Puppet Little Soldiers is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 4 with 0 attack and defense. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can send one Gimmick Puppet monster with a different level than this card from your deck to the graveyard. This card level becomes that monsters. You can only use this effect of Gimmick Puppet Little Soldiers once per turn. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target up to 2 Gimmick Puppet monsters you control, increase their levels by 4 until the end of this turn. The way the Gimmick Puppets work is the archetype has 2 levels of monsters. They either are level 4 or they're level 8. There's a couple of exceptions. I think there's one which is like the gear change, which adjusts its level from level 1 to copy the level of any of your other monsters, so it can either change itself to the level 4 or to the level 8 to go into either their rank 4s, which is, I think there's one of them, and there's also the rank 8 monsters, which tends to be the bulk of them boss monsters. When this card is normal special summoned, you're able to just pitch a Gimmick Puppet monster that has a different level from this card, so it has to be a level 8 that you're pitching, and this card will forcibly become that level, so it will become a level 8. This makes it much easier for a couple of reasons, as firstly, this becomes a level 8, meaning if you've got another monster that's level 8, you can instantly go into one of a variety of their number monsters, for example, Gimmick Puppet, Giant Grinder, easy enough, just 2 level 8 monsters for its summon. You also have the other one, which is the Gimmick Puppet of Strings, which requires 2 level 8 monsters, but with the Gimmick Puppet of Leo, you do need 3 level 8 monsters to bring it out, so it is a little bit trickier. You also have the benefit of when this card is in the graveyard, just by banishing it, you can take 2 of your Gimmick Puppet monsters that you currently control, increase their levels by 4. So if you've got 2 level 4 monsters already on your field, they adjust and crank themselves up to 8, making them an easy 1 card Exceed summon. This card was actually seen within the anime. It was something around episode 32, 33, where Quattro was facing off against Kronk, and Caswell was the other one from Yu-Gi-Oh! Zeal, and this character was shown being kind of the controller of the Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder as it was using its effect. Gimmick Puppet Yugioh is a Dart Attribute Machine type level 8 with 400 attack and 1400 defense. If this card is in your hand, you can reveal 1 Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monster in your extra deck, special summon both this card and Gimmick Puppet monster with the same level as the revealed monster's rank from your deck. If this card is sent to the graveyard except from the hand, you can add it to your hand. You can only use each effect of Gimmick Puppet Yugioh once per turn. Also, you cannot special summon from the extra deck the turn you activate either of this card's effects, except Gimmick Puppet monsters. Okay, so this is a level 8 monster, so that just adds to how that deck likes to play. When this card is in the hand, just by revealing a Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monster in the extra deck, so that could be any of them, you can instantly special summon this card and an additional Gimmick Puppet monster that has the same level as the revealed monster's rank from your deck, so that'll be a rank 8 monster. When this card is sent to the graveyard, except from the hand, this card gets to be added back to the hand. That's useful as it's a way of reoccurring without having to run additional forms of recovery cards that are generic and don't really fit well within the deck. The other benefit is, since you are going to be using a monster of the same level straight from the deck and sending that straight to your field, it's beneficial as that will often have a graveyard-based effect which will either protect one of your Gimmick Puppet monsters or provide you with some sort of search advantage. Gimmick Puppet's Castle Scream is a Dart Attribute Machine at type level 8 with 2000 attack and 2000 defense. You can detach 1 material from an Exceeds monster you control, special summon this card from your hand or graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. You can only use this effect of a Gimmick Puppet Castle Scream once per turn. A Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monster that has this card as material gains this effect. Once per turn, you can target 1 monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your opponent's field in defense position. Now, the first requirement on this card is pretty easy. You're just attaching a material from an Exceeds monster that you already have. There are some of the Gimmick Puppet monsters that you may not need to use both of their materials within the turn, and often more than not, you can't use more than 1 material, so actually using their other material isn't necessarily a bad thing. If this card is used as a material for a Gimmick Puppet monster, you're able to revive 1 of your opponent's monsters in their graveyard in defense position. Fantastic for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you target an Exceeds monster, then that helps to use the effect of the Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder, as that can do some damage to the opponent. This can also work quite well with the effect of Gimmick Puppet of Strings, which leaves one of the string counters on it, and then of the next turn at the end phase, it destroys that card and inflicts 500 points damage times the number of cards that were destroyed by that card's effect. Very useful for adding consistency to the deck, as there were often very difficult ways for you to kind of shoehorn reviving your opponent's monsters to fuel any of their effects. Now you have an inbuilt version of that effect. Another thing to notice is it's actually quite strange of the level 8 monsters. Most of them have very barely any attack points. I think some of them have like 1,000 attack, some of them have 0 attack and defense. This is the strongest of them with 2,000 attack and defense. Light End Sublimation Dragon is a light attribute dragon type of 8 with 2,600 attack and 2,100 defense. You can banish one 8 dragon monster from your X deck, special summon this card from your hand. Also, you can special summon for the rest of its turn, except dragon monsters. During your main phase, you can fusion summon one fusion monster from your X deck using monsters from your hand or field. When an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can make this card lose exactly 500 attack and defense, and if you do, that opponent's monster loses 1,500 attack. You can only use each effect of Light End Sublimation Dragon once per turn. This has an alternative version, which it happens to be a synchro monster, and this is much easier to bring out. All you need to do is banish a level 8 dragon monster from the X deck. So long as you kind of meet those conditions, that's perfectly fine. It has exactly the same kind of effect as the original Light End Dragon, as it does pretty much the same thing. It makes you lose 500 attack and defense, and your opponent's monster loses 1,500 attack. It means in most points that you're able to beat over that card using this card or one of your other monsters. It also has the opportunity to fusion summon a monster from your extra deck just using monsters from your hand or field. They have to be from one or the other. It's a shame that it's not from both, as there are cards that do that, but it means that you're not having to run a dedicated conversation, which at some points can be a brick as you're drawing it into the hat. Dark End Evaporation Dragon is a dark attribute dragon type level 8 with 2,600 attack and 2,100 defense. You can banish one level 8 dragon monster from your X deck, special summon this card from your hand. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of this turn except dragon monsters. You can activate one of these effects. Fusion summon one fusion monster from your X deck using monsters from your hand or field. It will target one other attack position monster on the field, make this lose exactly 500 attack and defense, and if you do, destroy that monster. You can only use each effect of Dark End Evaporation Dragon once per turn. This is equivalent to the Dark End Dragon, which was the synchro version and was used in the anime, kind of within the manga for Chaz Princeton. It meets all the conditions of that previous monster, but this is easy to summon as it just requires you to banish a level 8 dragon monster from the extra deck. Pretty much, if you get rid of the synchro monster that's the equivalent of this card, then that meets this condition. This card can instantly be special summoned, and you can either choose to fusion summon a fusion monster without using polymerization. Again, this is limited to either being purely from the hand or purely from the field, depending on your situation, rather than running additional forms of fusion cards. The other effect is to target another attack position monster. By making this card lose 500 attack and defense, that monster is destroyed. This is a bit worse of an effect because I think with the Dark End Dragon it was a send the card to the graveyard, whereas with destruction based effects that often triggers off other monsters' abilities and can chain to a more negative reaction than if you were to pretty much leave that card alone. This card is Night Armed Dragon, the Armored Night Dragon. It's a wind attribute dragon type level 3 with 1,400 attack and 1,900 defense. If you special summon a level 5 or higher dragon monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is special summoned, you can make this card's attribute and level become the same as one of your banished dragon monsters. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one dragon monster you control. It gains 1,000 attack points. Neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation. You can only use each effect of Night Armed Dragon, the Armored Night Dragon, once per turn. For anyone who isn't aware, this is supposed to be additional support for the Armed Dragon series, so that's to do with Chaz Princeton. He has the level 3, the level 5, the level 7 and the level 10 dragons, and then they have their Thunderbolt versions, which are the equivalent, but seem to be like an upgrade of them, as well as the White Knight Dragon. They do have additional support. There is another equivalent of this card, but it's kind of reversed in that it has 1,900 attack and 1,400 defense, and that's a level 4 monster. And there's also the Armed Pile Dragon, which is another version of like the Armed Dragon level 7, but it's able to kind of special summon itself to the field and pitch a card and boost its own attack points. It does limit to only one attack during that turn of its effect's activation. But with this card, I think I was watching a video with Team APS and Paul was kind of showing this card a couple of times. He didn't really explain it, he just kind of brushed past it, which is why I thought it was important to cover this card. When a level 5 or higher dragon monster, bear in mind, level 5 and higher, this card can instantly be special summoned, and it reflects the attribute and the level of that same monster, as you want to be at any of those types of cards. Perfect for a Chaos style, as you'll be running lots of different monsters of different typings and perhaps dragons within that, and you can meet that condition. When this card is sent to the graveyard, dragon monsters you control by 1,000 attack points. It helps to boost the deck, and with the Armed Dragon series, the more damage you can kind of pile on at one go, the easier it is for you to win and put your opponent in a position where they might not be able to pay life point costs or may not be able to do anything else. It says that neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this effect's activation, so it's not one that can be interacted with. It forces whatever monster you choose to just gain 1,000 attack. A Stellar of the White Forest is light attribute spellcaster type, level 2 with 0 attack and defense. You can send one spell or trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon one light attribute spellcaster tuner from your deck. If a spell or trap is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster's effect, while this card is in the graveyard, except during a damage step, you can special summon this card. You can only use each effect of a Stellar of the White Forest once per turn. By sending a spell or trap from the hand or field to the graveyard, you're just instantly able to bring out a light spellcaster tuner from the deck, and depending on what that card does, can give you additional benefits. It helps you to go into your synchro monsters more easily with fewer requirements. And if a spell or trap card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster's effect, which will be how the White Forest archetype likes to play with, provided this card's in the graveyard, you're instantly able to special summon this card, so it can be used as more kind of synchro material for your higher level synchro monsters. Elzet of the White Forest is a light attribute spellcaster type level 2 with 0 attack and defense. You can send one spell or trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon this card from your hand, then add one White Forest monster from your deck to your hand, except Elzet of the White Forest. During your opponent's turn, the light spellcaster tuner is special summoned to your field. While this card is in your graveyard, except during damage step, you can add this card to your hand. You can only use each effect of Elzet of the White Forest once per turn. Similarly to the previous monster, this card has 0 attack and defense, and it's just a standard monster. Just by sending a spell or trap from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can instantly special summon this card, and you can search for a White Forest monster straight from the deck to the hand, except a copy of itself. During the opponent's turn, if a light spellcaster tuner monster is special summoned to your field, so there'll be ways within the deck that you can do this. So long as this card's in the graveyard, you can then return this to the hand. It means that your opponent's unlikely to be able to engage with this card and send it back to graveyard or banish it, unless they've got cards which interact with the hand. Typically less so than if the card was then summoned straight onto the field, and then gives you the opportunity to reuse this resource. Sylvie of the White Forest is a light attribute spellcaster type tuner effect monster. It's a level 4 with 1,500 attack and 200 defense. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add one White Forest spell trap from your deck to your hand. If this card is in your graveyard, as a quick effect, you can target one White Forest synchro monster you control, or in your graveyard, return it to the extra deck. And if you do, special summon this card, but negate its effects. You can only use each effect of Sylvie of the White Forest once per turn. Okay, so this is the first of the tuner monsters that I have, and it's level 4, which means you're going to be able to get into your higher level synchro monsters more easily, as it's a decent level. When this card is normal or special summoned, you can just search for a White Forest spell or trap from the deck to hand, so it's an easy search for that. And if this card is in the graveyard, just by targeting a white forest synchro monster you control or that's in the graveyard, by returning it to the extra deck, you can straight away just special summon this card. It does lose its effects, but it still keeps itself as a tuner monster, so you can then synchro summon into something better. This is more useful when your white forest synchro monster happens to be, in the graveyard as opposed to on the field, unless it's been summoned onto the field with its effects negated, in which case it won't really matter. Rusia of the White Forest is the light attribute spellcaster type tuner effect monster, level 4 with 800 attack and 1500 effects. If you control a White Forest monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. You can send one spell or trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard and draw one card. If this card is in your graveyard as quick effect, you can target one White Forest synchro monster you control, or in your graveyard, return it to the extra deck. And if you do, special summon this card, negate its effects. You can only use each effect of a Rusia of the White Forest once per turn. This is another one of their level 4 tuner monsters, okay for its attack and defense, but so long as you've got a White Forest monster, you're instantly able to special summon this card, so it's not eating up your normal summon, by sending a spell or trap from your hand or field to graveyard, and it can be any, it doesn't have to be like a White Forest based one. You are able to draw an additional card, which can help you to further the game, add to your consistency. When this card is in the graveyard, by targeting a White Forest synchro monster you control or that's in the graveyard, similar to the previous tuner monster, it gets returned to the extra deck, and this card gets special summoned. Similarly, its effects do get negated, but it's still a tuner monster, so it can be used for a synchro summon of a different monster. More useful when the synchro monster happens to be in the graveyard and gets to be returned into the extra deck without using any form of recovery card. Alternatively, if you've got a synchro monster that happens to have its effects negated, it's a good way of sending that card back to hopefully bring that card out in the future. Fiendsmith Engraver is a light attribute Fiends type level 6 with 1800 attack and 2400 defense. You can discard this card, add one Fiendsmith spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. You can target one Fiendsmith equip card you control and one monster on the field, send them to the graveyard. If this card is in your graveyard, you can shuffle one other light Fiend monster from your graveyard into the deck / extra deck to special summon this card. You can only use each of the Fiendsmith Engraver once per turn. This is the key card for the Fiendsmith archetype. It is quite powerful in that it's got 1800 attack and 2400 defense, which justifies why it's a level 6 monster. But simply by discarding this card, you can search for a Fiendsmith spell or trap card from the deck to your hand, and you can target one Fiendsmith equipped card you control and one monster on the field. Those cards do get sent to graveyard, but by sending them to the graveyard, it means they're not destruction-based effects, which prevents your opponent from triggering any of their kind of reoccurrence effects. It's a good way of getting rid of one of their imminent threats without you having to expend too many cards. When this card is in the graveyard, just by shuffling another light Fiend monster from your graveyard into the deck or extra deck, be that, an extra deck monster or just a main deck monster, you're able to instantly special summon this card. So it does have reoccurrence, and it's simply a once per turn effect. It's not a hard limit, and it's not a once per turn disadvantage. Ragnarok Wicked Butterfly is a Earth attribute insect type level 4 with 1800 attack and 0 defense. You can discard this card, special summon one insect, plant or reptile monster from your hand. If this card is banished from the hand or graveyard, you can draw cards during the end phase of this turn, equal to the number of different monster types among the monsters you control that are insect, plant or reptile. You can only use each effect of Ragnarok Wicked Butterfly once per turn. For a level 4 monster, it's quite decent as it has 1800 attack points. Just by discarding this card, you're able to special summon an insect, a plant or a reptile monster from your hand, and it's not restrictive of levels. So long as it meets the type conditions, it's fine for anything. So it's quite decent for splashing into multiple types of decks. If this card is banished from the hand or the graveyard, you're just able to draw cards during the end phase of the turn. That is a bit of a disadvantage in that you're drawing kind of endpoint where you can't really do anything, but at least you've got cards for the next coming turns, equivalent to the different monster types you can have. Potentially, if you're running all 3 types within the deck, that's up to 3 cards that can be drawn. It can be negated by a card such as Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring, so there is the disadvantage of that, but that's a risk you're going to have to run. It's a decent consistency card for the deck, and it's definitely have to be run at least 2 copies of. Tenpei Dragon Genroku is a fire attribute dragon type level 3 with 0 attack and 1000 defense. If this card is added to your hand, except by drawing it, you can special summon this card as a tuner. You can then increase its level by 1. As a quick effect, you can tribute this card, special summon one Tenpei Dragon monster from your deck, except Tenpei Dragon Genroku. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of this turn, except dragon monsters. You can only use each effect of Tenpei Dragon Genroku once per turn. This card is one of the Tenpei archetypes, and it just adds to consistency of the deck. It hasn't got any attack points, and it's only 1000 defense points, so it doesn't seem like much. But if this card is just added to the hand, except by drawing it, you're able to instantly special summon this card, and it's treated as a tuner. So there's an easy way of you getting into a synchro monster. And then this card's level gets increased by 1, which also helps to go into your higher level synchro monsters. As a quick effect, you can just tribute this card to special summon a Tenpei Dragon monster from your deck, except a copy of itself, so it does have the ability to substitute itself for something better. But you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn except dragon monsters, so it does lock you into dragon types. That isn't so much of a problem as there are so many dragon-based support cards. There is no issue with that. Had there been something like Illusion or some of the newly supported archetypes, then I would say that's more of a concern. Each effect of this card can only be used once per turn, but that's necessary as a form of restriction. Topland Sleepy is an Earth Attribute Beast type level 3 with 800 attack and 1000 defense. During a turn, a monster in your possession is destroyed by card effect. As a quick effect, you can special summon this card from your hand. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can fusion summon one Memento fusion monster from your edge deck using the monsters from your hand or field. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can send one Memento card from your deck to the graveyard, except Momentum Sleepy. You can only use each effect of Momentum Sleepy once per turn. This card is the kind of new version of Mystical Sheep as an effect monster. The original version was also an effect monster, and I think it was like the number 2 had like a fusion substitute type of effect where it could treat itself as the name of one of those fusion materials if used as part of a fusion summon, which explains what this card does. You're able to instantly fusion summon a Memento fusion monster. Currently, I think there's only the Momentum, which is the Twin Dragon, and that's the version of Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon as a brand new version of itself. Decent, but until we get more fusion monsters, it's still quite hard locked into that particular card, as it does require to go into a Memento fusion monster. If this card is destroyed by battle or card effect, you're just able to send a Memento card from your deck to graveyard. It's a good way of foolish burying those cards, as those cards can then be easier to revive from the graveyard than to search from the deck. It also has the ability to just... It is reliant on being destroyed by a card effect to trigger off the fusion effect, but you can actually do that very easily within its own archetype. That's how they work, by destroying each other and triggering off their effects. Centurion Atri is a Dark Attribute Dragon type tuner effect monster. It's a level 4 with 1800 attack and 1400 defense. If this card you control would be used as a synchro material, you can treat it as a non-tuner. You can only use each of the following effects of Centurion Atri once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned and you have both an Emblema card and a Centurion card in your graveyard, you can draw 1 card. Also, you cannot special summon Centurion Atri for the rest of this turn. During the main phase, if this card is a continuous trap, you can special summon this card. This card has the ability to be used as either a tuner or a non-tuner, so depending on your situation, it can be preferable for either. It is a dragon type monster, so there is quite a lot of support for dragon type monsters, and when this card is normal or special summoned, provided you've got an Emblema and Centurion card in your graveyard, you get an additional draw that adds to consistency of the deck. And if this card happens to be treated as a continuous trap, which a lot of the cards tend to interact with the spell and trap zone, hard. Drytron New 2 is a light attribute machine type level 1 with 2000 attack and 0 defense. It cannot be normal summoned or set and must be special summoned by a card effect. If a Drytron card is on the field, you can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard, but banish it when it leaves the field. If this card is special summoned, you can add 1 Drytron monster from your deck to your hand, except Drytron New 2. You can only use this effect of Drytron New 2 once per turn. Also, you cannot ritual the turn you activate either of this card's effects, except machine monsters. This card is purposed to kind of add to consistency of the Drytron deck. They work by having both their monsters, which happen to be level 1 machine type light attributes, and they work through their ritual spell card by getting rid of monsters that would equate to the ritual monster they're summoning's attack points. So for example, there's a couple of them that have 4,000 attack and defense. By using like 2 of these cards as part of the requirements, that meets the condition. The Exceeds monster they have also kind of is able to do this, but extend that type of play. And what this card does is similar to the others in that it cannot be summoned or set unless you special summon this card by a card effect. So there are some Drytron spell and trap cards that can do this for you, or if you already have a Drytron card already on the field, then this is a way of special summoning this card from the hand or the graveyard, so it can reoccur itself, but it does get banished when it leaves the field. When this card is special summoned, you can just search for a Drytron monster from your deck to your hand. That includes its ritual monsters because they have Drytron in their name, but it does limit you to only ritual summoning cards that are machine monsters. Perfectly fine, as that's what the Drytron archetype wants to do, but I think it's much to prevent you from using the Cyber Angels, as they would often splash within the deck to add to consistency of ritual decks. Lord of the Missing Barrows is a light attribute fiend type level 10 with 3,100 attack and a 2,900 defense. You can special summon this card from your hand up to 3 cards from your graveyard, 1 monster, 1 spell and 1 trap. If this card is special summoned from your hand, you can banish 1 monster and 2 spell or traps from your opponent's field and or graveyard. You can only use this effect of Lord of the Missing Barrows once per turn. When they were announcing the cards, this was one that I completely missed and quite shocked that I was, as it's quite uniquely designed. It is a level 10 monster, and typically you would think that's quite difficult to summon, but actually if you've made your deck in a certain way, then perhaps it's not so much of a problem. It does have 3,100 attack points, as for the cost that you're facing, those cards are already in your graveyard and most likely having been used within the duel and outlived their usefulness. Just by banishing 3 cards, it does have to be one of each of the cards, a monster, a spell and a trap, so you're going to have to set up your deck in such a way as to force that to work. When this card is special summoned, you can banish a monster and 2 spell or traps from your opponent's field and or graveyard. So it's a good way of clearing your opponent's board enough so that you can either do some direct damage or to put them in such a disadvantage as they can't recover those cards, as often decks that don't rely on banishing cannot run on recovering banished based cards. Cosmo Queen, the Queen of Prayers, is a dark attribute spellcaster type level 8 with 2,900 attack and 2,450 defense. Its effect is if a field spell card is activated, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. You can target a 1 face-up card in the field zone, then activate the appropriate effect based on which player controls that card. If it's you, destroy it, and if you do, add 1 field spell from your deck to your hand with a different name. If it's your opponent, negate its effects until the end of this turn, and if you do, add 1 field spell from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Cosmo Queen and the Queen of Prayers once per turn. This is a new version of the original Cosmo Queen, which is a normal monster. It was one of the most powerful spellcasters. It was, at a time, the most powerful spellcaster monster that happened to be a normal type. It is quite decent, as it does have field spell interactions, and when a field spell is just simply activated, this card can be instantly brought onto the field. It does mean that you're going to have to rely on having a field spell heavy type deck to harness this effect consistently, and depending on who is activating it will determine what you can do. So if it's just yourself, then it destroys its field spell and you get to replace it with just a different field spell. So you might have a worse field spell in your hand, you just want to get rid of that card to actually bring out another one. You may not have any of the other ones to search for field spells such as Terraforming or Metaverse, and this is a different way of getting to that card. Alternatively, if your opponent activates, often those archetype-specific field spells have ones where, upon its activation, you can then search for a particular monster within its archetype or a spell trap card. This would help to shut down that effect, and it would help you to then also search into one of your own field spells. Paralyzing Mushroom is a light attribute Thunder type level 5 with 1,400 attack and 0 effects. If a monster that was originally Thunder is sent from the field or handed to the graveyard, even during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. If a Thunder monster's effect is activated in the hand while this card is in the monster zone, except during the damage step, you can special summon 1 Paralyzing token. It's a Thunder Dark level 1 with 0 attack and defense. You can only use each effect of Paralyzing Mushroom once per turn. This is meant to be a Thunder-based support, and it confuses me as to its significance. If a monster that was originally a Thunder is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, so I'm guessing that will be very much within the Thunder Dragon deck, including during the damage step, this card can instantly be special summoned. If a Thunder monster's effect is activated in the hand, so yeah, there are quite a few Thunder Dragon effects that do activate from the hand. There's a couple of other cards that do work alongside this that have to be Thunder types, and this card is in your monster zone. You're able to just bring out a token. The token itself isn't that useful. It's got 0 that doesn't have any requirements, as that would meet often the conditions, or maybe one that might require a Thunder type monster as such demonstrated. If you guys know what this card interacts with well, please put those in the comments to clarify things. Disablaster, the Negation Fortress, is a light attribute machine type pendulum effect monster. It's a level 5 with a scale of 5. It has 500 attack and 2000 defense. The pendulum effect is to negate any card effects that are activated in this card's column. The monster effect is if there is a column with no cards, you can special summon this card from your hand to your zone in that column. You can only special summon Disablaster's the Negation Fortress once per turn this way. Negate any card effects activated in this card's column. If this card is in the monster zone is destroyed, you can place this card in your pendulum zone. Okay, so I like the design of this card because it does have, its name really tells you what it does. The Negation Fortress. It's intended to negate things. In terms of pendulum effects, negate any effects activated in this card's column, so that includes both yours and your opponent's. You have to be very careful about where you place those cards. With pendulum scales and the new rulings on pendulum monsters, they have to be either in the further left field or the further right field. So those are the limitations as to how you can negate in terms of it being a pendulum monster. With the monster effect, if there is a column with no cards, you're just able to instantly special summon this card from your hand to your zone in that column. This means you are using up a free zone, so there is a bit of a disadvantage in that if your opponent knows what this card does, is not willing to commit to those zones, you're going to have to force them to commit to those zones by running other cards such as, I think there's a couple zone-based cards which will negate types of effects. If you can fear them into kind of putting it in the same row as this card, as this only negates effects, it doesn't destroy them, that might be an alternative solution. You could also, there's another way, this is a level 5, so you could technically pendulum summon this card if you've got the right scales perfectly reasonably, so long as there aren't any hard limitations to that, or you can actually tribute over a monster. You know, you could go the old-fashioned way and bring this card out onto a zone with other cards already available in that zone. It does negate those cards in the same column, so potentially that is 3 additional cards, as it will hit your opponent's monster zone, their spell and trap zone, and your spell and trap zone that this card resides within. Wolfcharmy Perulia is a water attribute type at level 4 with 100 attack and 600 effects. If you control no cards as a quick effect, you can discard this card, apply these effects this turn. Each time your opponent normal or special summons a monster from the hand, immediately draw 1 card. Once during this end phase, if the number of cards in your hand is more than the number of cards your opponent controls, plus 6, you must randomly shuffle cards from your hand into the deck, so the number in your hand equals the number your opponent controls, plus 6. You can only activate one other Wolfcharmy monster effect the turn you activate this effect. This is meant to be another version of the Maxi, so it's a version that's kind of not going to be banned, and as it implies, there are going to be like a sub-series of Wolfcharmy monsters. I have seen the other one that has been available, and it's probably better than this card, so that next set, that's going to be one of the chase cards. But saying this, it's also noting that each of the 2 Wolfcharmy monsters are of a different attribute and a different typing. This is a water attribute aqua type. The other monster happens to be a wind attribute winged beast type. So I'm wondering whether we're going to get an equivalent for each of the other attributes. We might get a fire and a light and a dark version, each with a typing that corresponds well to what you associate with those attributes, such as, you know, when I think rock. When I think fire, I think pyro. When I think light, I think fairy. When I think dark, I think fiend. In terms of the effect of this card, you do need to have no cards and then you can discard this card to apply the effect. So this will have to happen when you're going second, or it will have to be in a way where you just don't have these cards to start off with, or you're able to return those cards somewhere else, be that to your hand, to the graveyard, back to the extra deck, back to the deck, whatever those requirements are. When your opponent normal specimens a monster from the hand, immediately draw one card. This may seem like a bit of a concern for most people, but bear in mind it's very specific as to where it has to happen. The normal special summons have to happen from the hand. It's not from anywhere else. It's not from the extra deck. It's not from a banishment. It's not from the main deck. That's only when they draw the cards. And so by having this very restricted limitation to them, whereas Mat C was just basically whenever cards were special summoned, you draw a card. That was free range for everyone. This can often be pivoted in a way where it's not so conducive. If your opponent is running a multi-themed style of deck, which can rely on cards from, say, for example, the main deck and special summon straight from there, they can often pivot their strategy in a way which avoids this card's effect and thereby dodging it. This other effect, the secondary effect, is so that you don't end up with so many cards at an advantage, which Mat C always did, as the effect Mat C just kept going and going and going. So unless you could deck out your opponent by special summoning that many monsters, it wasn't really worth going for. Your opponent would end up with so much advantage. And if their hand limit is over 6, they don't have to discard at the end phase of your turn. They only discard at the end phase of their own turn. That meant they had the entire round of their own turn to be able to use any number of cards. And if they had to discard, it was not much of a cost, as they would discard the cards that they could recover, or ones that would recover from the graveyard based on their own effects. This is depending on how hard your opponent goes as to the number of cards they have to have on their field. The more cards they have on their field, the more cards you're allowed to keep. Realistically thinking, they'll have 2-3 cards that potentially gives you permission to keep up to 9 cards in your hand. If they max out and they fill out their board, you could have a maximum of 12 cards in your hand. Most likely, they're not going to give you that opportunity. They're going to keep that as minimal as possible and to really harness and focusing on those cards that they want at the end board to control. This would often mean going for, the highest extending monsters, maybe going for their level 12 synchro monsters instead of going for like a level 6, a level 8, and a level 10 somewhere. It also means that since you are randomly shuffling the cards from your hand into the deck, if you have drawn too much, you are then not able to choose and pick what is going to be sent back to the deck. And that's where the disadvantage comes into place. But I do see the value in this card, and I do think in the future it will be worth running. Dora Dora is a fire attribute dragon type level 3 with 400 attack and 200 defense. If this card is normal summoned, you can add one a level 4 or the fire dragon monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Dora Dora once per turn. Once per turn during your main phase, you can activate the top card of your deck, and if it's a fire dragon monster, send it to the graveyard. And if you do, this card gains 1000 attack for each Dora Dora you control. Otherwise, place the activated card on the bottom of the deck. There is another card which is like this, which is called like Pokey Draco, and it's similar, but it's just like useless. This card, as soon as it's normal summoned, you can add a level 4 or lower fire dragon monster from your deck to hand. So I think Horus Blackflame Dragon level 4 is an example of that. There are probably other examples which are better, which suit the deck and are much easier to search for and better for your strategy. In terms of the main phase, you can activate the top card of a deck if it happens to be a fire dragon, so you're going to be looking at running a pure fire attribute dragon type deck just to send it to the graveyard. This card gains 1000 attack for each Dora Dora you control. Otherwise, place the activated card on the bottom of the deck. So if you call it right and you have 2 other Dora Doras on the field, this card can become a 3400 attack monster. And it's a once per turn effect during the main phase, but it's not a hard one. It is a harder once per turn because you can only use this effect. No, it's actually the first effect that's only a hard once per turn. The secondary effect can actually be used by each and every one of them. So I could see some type of cheese deck where you've got all 3 of these cards on the field. They each come 3400 attack points and they beat over a monster. Impressive as 3 level 3 monsters can beat over your opponent's life points. It's similar to something like Injection Fairy Lily where, you have to give a load of life points and then this card becomes like 3400 attack points. It's the whole whole style of trying to make weaker monsters appear more powerful. It's just a bit of consistency issue if you're wanting to run more than one typing or more than one attribute. Broomy is a light attribute spellcaster type tuner effect monster. It's a level 2 with 700 attack and 700 defense. It cannot be used as synchro material except for the synchro summon of a level 8 or lower monster. You can reveal this card and one monster in your hand, special summon one of the two, and if you do, banish the other. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon from the extract except synchro monsters, and can only declare an attack with synchro monsters. You can only use this effect of Broomy once per turn. Within a lot of the sets, you do get some interesting kind of individual cards, and alongside of this, you get some quite different looking and themed tuner monsters. This isn't aligned to any specific attribute or archetype or typing, and it can be splashed within any of them. It is a level 2, so that's actually useful for getting quite a variety of different levels, but it is restricted to only summoning up to a level 8 synchro monster. By simply revealing this card and another monster in your hand, you're able to special summon one of the two. So if you already have a tuner monster on your field, most likely you're going to want to special summon the other monster rather than this card, and the other card just gets banished. It does then hardlock you into synchro summons for the rest of that turn, and you're only able to make attacks with synchro monsters, so you need to be pretty sure that you're going to go into multiple synchro monsters within that round. Veteran Bat is an Earth attribute Winged Beast tuner effect monster. It's a level 1 0 attack and defense. Up to thrice per turn, if your opponent special summons a monster, except during a damage step, you can target one of them, toss a coin, and if the result is heads, change it to face up attack position, or if the result is tails, change it to face down defense position. Once per turn, if another monster on the field is flipped face up, or a face up monster is changed to face down defense position, even during a damage step, you can target one of them, change it to face up attack position or face down defense position. Similarly to, having that interaction with other tuner monsters, having new refreshing effects, this is another example. This is a level 1, so it's quite versatile in going into most of the synchro monsters that you prefer, and up to 3 times in a turn, as soon as your opponent normal special summons a monster, just targeting one of them, you toss a coin. If the result is heads, that monster stays in that face-up attack position, or if the result is tails, they go to face-down defense position. So it's a Book of Moon type of effect. Ideally, you want those cards to really be resulting in tails, as when they're in face-down defense position, they can't be used for any of the extra deck summons, so it does restrict them for the rest of the turn. It also means that their cards are not going to be a threat for the duration. It also has the ability, if another monster on the field is flipped face-up, or a face-up monster is changed to face-down defense position, to target one of them, and then they appear in the reverse order, so it kind of flip-flop. The idea of this is to disrupt your opponent. But in order to get the maximum of this type of effect, you have to be running all the kind of flip effect cards that increase your chances, such as, I think the second coin toss is an example that would work very well. You would really need this in a very niche style of deck. Depress Pard is a light attribute beast type level 2 with 100 attack and 100 defense. If this card is the only card in your hand, you can special summon this card. If you do, this card's attack becomes 2,500 until the end of your opponent's turn. If this card battles an opponent's monster, you take any battle damage your opponent would have taken from that battle. If you take damage from battles involving this card's attack becomes 0. Then if your life points are 2,000 or less, this card's attack becomes 5,000. This is a very unique style of effect, and it's one of those that actually, for the most part, is just a massive disadvantage to you, and I wouldn't consider running it. This card, firstly, to use its effect to be special summoned, has to be the only card in your hand. You are pretty much going to have to run this in something like an Infernity archetype to guarantee that. At least it doesn't have to be the only card on your field. So if you've got loads of spam trap cards in your hand, you can just set those cards and then trigger off this effect. When you do this, this card's attack becomes 2,500. Not bad for a level 2 monster. But bear in mind that any damage taken from your opponent is actually inflicted to yourself, so you're actually making your situation worse. Only time this card is actually good is if there's a decent kind of threat on your opponent's field and you just want to wipe that out and you don't mind the life point cost you're going to take. But if you happen to take damage from battles, this card then reverts to having 0 attack points. But if your life points have to be 2,000 or less, this card's attack then becomes 5,000, which is again a problem as you take any damage that comes from that effect. Although the wording on this is a little bit strange, it almost seems like all the damage that happens to occur to your opponent Drytron Meteornis DA Draconids is a light attribute machine type ritual effect monster. It's a level 12 with 5000 attack and 5000 defense. You can rich summon this card with Meteornis Drytron. Other Drytron monsters you control cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Twice per turn when your opponent activates a monster effect. As a quick effect, you can banish Drytron monsters minimum 1 from your graveyard, whose total attack equal or exceed the original attack of that monster. Negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. If this ritual summon card in its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can special summon one ritual monster with 4000 attack from your hand or deck. This is treated as a ritual summon. This is the most powerful of the Drytron ritual monsters as so far. The others do have 4000 attack and defense points and are extremely powerful in and of their own rights. They are level 12 monsters. This card can instantly be just summoned with the Meteornis Drytron, and that often requires them to have attack points that exceed this monster's, so therefore I think most of the Drytron monsters have 2000 attack points. You would need to get rid of 3 of those cards in order to bring this card out, but often with the ritual spell card it allows you to use that kind of effect with Fafnir from the deck rather than from your hand. This prevents your Drytron monsters from being destroyed by your opponent's card effects, so that does provide a level of protection for your other monsters, and up to twice per turn, so that's 2 times. When the opponent activates a monster effect, just by banishing Drytron monsters, at least 1 from the graveyard, the attack has to equal or exceed the original monster's attack points. So just getting rid of 2 of those cards can negate the effects of a monster with 4000 attack points, which most of your opponent's monsters will be capped really at. It not only negates their effects, but they destroy it. And if this card happens to be destroyed by an opponent's card, so that can be either by battle or by card effect, you're able to just replace this card with another version of a Drytron monster. It's almost that kind of storyline that kind of, if you cut off the head of a snake, then additional snake heads will grow. The Unstoppable Ixonia Incarnate is a dark attribute spellhouse type fusion effect monster. It's a level 10 with a question mark attack and 0 defense. It requires 5 Forbidden 1 monsters. It cannot be destroyed by an opponent's card effect, and once per turn if this card battles, during damage calculation, you can make this card gain equal to your attack equal to your life points. Once per turn, when a spell, trap, or effect is activated, as a quick effect, you can negate that activation. Once per turn, during the end phase, you can set 1 Exiled or Obliterate spell or trap card from your deck. Once per turn, during the standby phase, lose 1000 life points. The summoning condition on this card requires 5 Forbidden 1 monsters, but bear in mind that the Millennium lets you kind of go into these cards very easily. They can be fusion summoned using monsters from your deck rather than from your hand. This is able to prevent itself from being destroyed by opponent's card effects, so you can actually destroy it yourself if you want to. It's just that your opponent can't. And each turn, when this card battles during the damage calculation, this card gains attack points equal to your life points. So the higher life points, the more attack points this card has. When a spell or trap does disrupt your opponent, and once per turn during the end phase, you're able to just search for an Exalt or Obliterate spell trap from your deck. It does come at the cost of once per turn during the standby phase, losing 1000 life points. So consistently as the game goes on, it's one of those situations where this card will always become weaker. This has difficulties going up against burn style decks, as they will whittle your life points down to a point where this card is no longer as good. I liken this a bit to how we have I believe there's one of the Mechlor Emperors that gains attack points equal to half your life points. So the more you can reduce the life points, the more weak that card becomes. It's also quite similar to something like the Heroic Challenger monster, the one that's currently been banned. I think it's like number 54, that one, the Ron Dominion, which has, you can get it up to 5 materials and then it's immune to everything. Its attack is doubled. It can wipe out things, it can negate things, and each and every turn you're having to forcibly detach a material from it, and therefore it's losing each of its effects slowly once each turn. The more you can kind of protect yourself from that, the weaker it steadily becomes. Light and Darkness Dragon Lord is a light attribute dragon type fusion effect monster. It's level 10 with 3400 attack and 3000 defense. It requires a level 8 light attribute dragon type monster and 1 level 8 dark dragon monster. It must be fusion summoned while face up on the field. This card is also dark attribute. Once per chain, if a spell or trap card or a monster effect is activated, as a quick effect, this card loses exactly 1000 attack and defense, and if it does, negate that activation. If this card is in its owner's possession, it's destroyed destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target one dragon monster in your graveyard and special summon it. The requirements on the card are pretty simple, as there are many dragons that meet these conditions. Dark attribute and light attributes are the most common attributes to run, and within support cards, dragon types tend to be the most supported archetypes. In terms of must-be fusion summon, that's fine, pretty easy to bring this card out. Whilst this card is on the field, it's treated as both a light and a dark. So again, it's just emphasizing that it's a bit of both, and there are other cards that do mimic this style of effect. Once per chain, so this is whenever a chain activates, you're able to negate a spell or trap or a monster effect, and each time it does that, this card loses 1,000 attack and defense. This means that you can use this effect up to 3 times unless you can boost this card's attack points up, and that's pretty decent, as unless your opponent's really trying to disrupt you and use some of the weakest cards, in which case, if you know the style of deck they're running and you know what they're trying to do, negating worthless cards, you're not going to do that. You have a choice of when you negate effects, not say every time a card is activated it forcibly negates that. Otherwise that would make this card pretty useless. If this card happens to be destroyed by an opponent's card, be that by battle or by a spell trap or monster effect, you're able to just take a dragon monster in your graveyard and special summon it. Often more than not, you're going to be trying to revive one of the 2 cards that you used through this card's fusion summon off. Fiendsmith the Creamer is a light attribute fiend type fusion effect monster. It's a level 6 with 2,400 attack and defense. It requires 2 light attribute fiend type monsters, and monsters your opponent controls lose 600 attack. You can only use each of the following effects: Fiendsmith the Creamer once per turn. If this card is a fusion, that you can target one of your light fiend monsters that is banished or in your graveyard, add it to your hand or special summon it. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can shuffle one other light fiend monster from your graveyard into the deck or extra deck, inflict 1,200 damage to your opponent. This card just requires 2 light fiend monsters as its fusion materials. In its own archetype and deck, that's pretty easy to do, but actually there are a couple of cards even within some of the Archfiend cards that happen to meet this condition. I think there's a Desrook Archfiend, which is also among the cards that can do this pretty simply. Instantly, a monster will lose 600 attack points, and that's just a continuous ongoing effect. So in terms of this card being able to compete against anything, so long as it's got 2,900 or less starting attack points, this is able to just beat those cards. If this card is fusion summoned, you're able to take one of your light fiend monsters that is banished or in the graveyard. It gets either added straight to the hand, or you have the option of special summon it. So this has a recovery style of secondary ability. And when this card is sent to the graveyard, and this could be by any ways, it could be by tributing or by using it as another fusion or by link summoning through other means, you're able to shuffle another light attribute fiend monster from your graveyard into either the deck or the extra deck, and your opponent takes 1,200 points of damage. It's very consistent. Not only does it suppress your opponent's monster's attack points, but it does have some recovery utility, and it has a last ability to burn the opponent. Fiendsmith Disarray is a light attribute fiend type fusion effect monster. It's a level 9 with 2,800 attack and 2,400 defense. It requires a Fiendsmith Engraver and 2 light fiend monsters. As a quick effect, you can negate the effects of a number of face-up cards on the field up to the total link rating of link monsters equipped to this card until the end of this turn. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can shuffle one other light fiend monster from your graveyard into the deck or extra deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Fiendsmith Disarray once per turn. This requires a specific monster, which is the Fiendsmith Engraver, and any 2 light fiend monsters, so the materials aren't too difficult to obtain. It just instantly negates the effects of a number of face-up monsters up to the total link rating of link monsters equipped to this card, and potentially you can get a few on there, so you could be negating 3, 4, 5 cards, and it can be activated during yours or your opponent's turn. That's the benefit of being a quick effect. When this card is sent to the graveyard, you're just able to shuffle another light fiend monster from the graveyard back into either the deck or the extra deck. You're able to target a card on the field, be it yours or your opponent's, and that gets sent straight to the graveyard, so they don't have any way of responding to that. It's a decent card, and it's fine for a level 9 monster to have those kind of stat lines. Momentomicon Tekluklika Creation King is an Earth attribute Machine Illusion fusion effect monster with level 9, 3,000 attack and 2,000 defense. It requires 3 memento monsters. You can banish this card from your graveyard, add one Midclan from your deck to your hand. You cannot activate the following effects of Midclan Technica Creation King in the same chain. If this card is fusion summoned, you can send 3 memento cards from your deck and or etch deck to graveyard. As a quick effect, you can target an equal number of memento monsters you control and cards your opponent controls, destroy them. You can only use each effect of Midclan Technica Creation King once per turn. This card has 3000 attack, it's decent for a level 9 monster and just needs any 3 memento monsters. It's not fussy. This is able to banish itself from the graveyard just to add another copy of a memento card from your deck to your hand. It cannot activate the following effects of the card in the same chain, so it does limit itself in that respect. But as soon as this card is fusion summoned, you're able to just send any 3 memento cards from the deck and or etch deck to the graveyard. You have to then target an equivalent number of memento monsters you control and cards your opponent controls and destroy them. Benefit is memento cards they activate their effects based on those cards being destroyed, whereas a lot of your opponent's cards won't respond to being destroyed very effectively. It's a good way of kind of giving yourself the advantage whilst completely taking away any of your opponent's advantage. But it is depending on the situation, as, for example, if your opponent doesn't really have many cards on the field, then you're not really going to want to go fully into this card unless you want to gain the effects of the memento cards that you're destroying. Silvera, Wolf Tamer of the White Forest, is a light attribute spellcaster synchro tuner effect monster. It's a level 6 with 1900 attack and 2400 effects. It requires a tuner and 1 or more non-tuners. If this card is special summoned, you can change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position. Illusion as spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack. Also, if they attack a defense position monster, inflict double piercing damage to your opponent. The summon condition on this card isn't difficult as it's very generic. It just needs a tuner and 1 or more non-tuner monsters. It is a synchro tuner, so we will be expecting some high-level synchro monsters somewhere down the line. As soon as this card is special summoned, and bear in mind it just isn't when it's synchro summoned, but actually it could be revived from a graveyard as another example of special summoning. All face-up monsters your opponent controls are Book of Mood. It's turned from face-up attack position to face-down defense position, and it means that all illusion and spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack. That includes this card. It will become a 2400 attack monster, and they can do piercing battle damage to your opponent, and it's double the piercing. So I've seen this within a couple of other cards that they want to really be introducing this with. This initially came in with the Blue Eyes Chaos Max Dragon with the 4000 attack points, the Ritual monster, and it's been slowly integrated into other archetypes and to individual monsters. Reikla, Sinister Soul of the White Forest, is a light attribute spellcaster synchro tuner effect monster. It's a level 6 with 2000 attack and 1500 effects, and requires a tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If this card is special summoned, you can send 1 spell trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard, add 1 White Forest card or 1 light spellcaster monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Reikla, Sinister Soul of the White Forest once per turn. Illusion and spellcaster synchro monsters you control gain 500 attack. Also, they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. The summon condition on this is like the other one in that it's generic, just a tuner and 1 or more tuner monsters can be splashed into multiple decks. It's a synchro tuner, so it will be preparing for high level synchro plays, and when this card is special summoned, so that can be either through its initial synchronism or when it's revived from the graveyard, you're able to send a spell trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard, and you can either search for a White Forest card or 1 light spellcaster monster from your deck to hand, and it can be any of those light spellcaster monsters. It doesn't have to be named within the archetype. This can only be used as part of the effect once per turn, but it also grants your illusion and spellcaster synchro monsters an additional 500 attack points, plus they are immune from being destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Diabelle, Queen of the White Forest, is a light attribute illusion synchro effect monster. It's level 8 with 2500 attack and 2000 defense. It requires a tuner plus 1 or more non-tuner monsters. If this card is synchro summoned using a tuner synchro monster, you can target 1 spell trap card in your graveyard, add it to your hand. When your opponent activates a card or effect as a quick effect, you can send 1 spell trap card from your hand or field to the graveyard, special summon 1 level 7 or lower tuner synchro monster from your deck, or banishment. You can only use each effect of the Diabelle, Queen of the White Forest once per turn. This card is an illusion monster, so it's quite unusual for a synchro monster to have this typing. Similarly, this is generic. It's a tuner plus one or more non-tuner monsters, and when this card is synchro summoned, provided you've used a tuner synchro monster, as a quick effect, you can send a spell trap card from the hand or field to the graveyard, and then instantly special summon a level summon or lower tuner synchro monster from your extra deck. This means it can actually be used within quite things that the secondary part of the effect can be triggered by the recovery of said spell trap card from your graveyard as part first effect. So it's a good kind of cyclical way of using those cards. DPH Gundam is a fire attribute Cyberse type synchro tuner monster. It's a level 8 with 2000 and 2800 defense. It requires a tuner plus one or more non-tuner monsters. If this card is synchro summoned, you can special summon one level 4 Cyberse monster from your graveyard in defense position that negate its effects. Also, you cannot special summon for the rest of this turn except Cyberse monsters. When your Cyberse monster battles an opponent's monster and inflicts battle damage to them, you can banish this card from your graveyard. Inflict that much damage to your opponent. You can only use each effect of DPH once per turn. This card is a Cyberse monster. There are plenty of support cards for the Cyberse typing. It's a synchro tuner monster, which I don't typically see with Cyberse. They tend to be more link-based, as they came out in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Vrain series, and that's where both the Cyberse type and the link extra deck monsters came into place at the same point. It requires a tuner and one or more non-tuner monsters, so it's generic, but as soon as this card is synchro summoned, you can special summon a level 4 Cyberse monster from your graveyard in defense position. This emphasizes that it only gets its benefit if you have Cyberse monsters in the deck. The effect is negated, and you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn, but it does lock you into Cyberse monsters if you are intending to special summon. When your Cyberse monster battles an opponent's monster and inflicts battle damage to them, just by banishing this card from the graveyard, inflict that much damage to your opponent. So this is a good way of reflecting damage to the opponent, and it's a good way of kind of forcing them to take additional points of damage, the more damage you can kind of do. It's similar to something like the volcanic counter, but actually it can double the damage that you are imposing to your opponent rather than kind of mutually taking any type of damage. Gimmick Puppet Fantasix Machinix is a dark attribute machine type Xyz monster. Is a rank 8 with 1500 attack and 3100 defense. It requires 2 level 8 monsters, and you detach 1 material from this card to add 1 rank up magic spell from your deck to your hand. Also, you can normal summon 1 machine monster during your main phase this turn, in addition to your normal summon or set. You can only gain this effect once per turn. If you special summon a Gimmick Puppet Xyz monster, except during damage step, you can special summon this card from your graveyard to either side of the field in a defense position. Then you can add 1 rank up magic spell from your graveyard to your hand. You can only use each effect of Gimmick Puppet Fantasix Machinix once per turn. This is meant to be designed on the look of Quattro. It is a rank 8 monster, as most of the Gimmick Puppet monsters are. I think there's only a couple of exceptions on their extra monsters. You've got a rank 4 and you've got 1 Link monster which came out of that Link collection pack that supported like 20 different themes. It requires just 2 level 8 monsters, pretty easy to do with the Gimmick Puppet archetype, and by detaching a material you're able to search for a magic spell from your deck to your hand. They have one which is like this heritage card which works alongside all of the other cards that they have. I mean, Trey used it, as well as Quinton, to rank up their number monsters into their chaos versions. This also grants you the ability to normal summon a machine monster in addition, and it's a machine monster. It doesn't have to be a Gimmick Puppet, but more than likely you are going to do that. It does prevent itself from being abused by this effect, because imagine if you could summon 3 of this card to the field in a turn and then normal summon an additional machine monster 3 times in that. That would be far too much. If you special summon a Gimmick Puppet Xyz monster outside of the damage step, this card can be special summoned from the graveyard to either field, so it's useful as if it's summoned to your opponent's field, then you can trigger off the effects of either the Gimmick Puppet Strings or the Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder to then inflict burn damage to the opponent. It also then allows you to search for another rank magic spell and recover that from the graveyard back to the hand, so you can then rank up your other Xyz monsters. Chaos Xyz Gimmick Puppet Fantasix Machinix is a Dark Attribute Machine type Xyz monster. It's a rank 9 with 3100 attack and 1500 defense, and requires 3 level 9 monsters. If this card is special summoned, you can add 1 Puppet Trap from your deck to your hand. You can detach 1 material from this card, special summon 1 monster from either graveyard to your opponent's field in defense position. If a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field except during the damage step, you can target one of them, destroy it, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to half its original attack. You can only use each effect at Chaos Xyz Gimmick Puppet Fantasix Machinix once per turn. The attack and defense points of this card are the reverse of the previous monster. In its normal form, it's only 1500 attack and 3100 defense, and by reversing this, it actually comes almost like you're changing it from the Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder into the other version, which is its Chaos form, and that does pretty much the same thing. As soon as this card is special summoned, and so that can be either through its Xyz summon or revived from the graveyard, you can search for a Puppet Trap card, and that goes from your deck to your hand. By detaching material from this, you can special summon a monster from either graveyard to the opponent's field in defense position, and if a monster is special summoned to your opponent's field, you're instantly able to use this part of its effect to target one of them and destroy it and inflict damage to the opponent equal to half its original attack. If you're aiming to give one of your cards to your opponent with, I think, the Gimmick Puppet Leo that has 3,300 attack points, so you could do 1,650 points of damage just through that effect, or you could choose one of their own cards if they've got something more powerful to do that same level of burn damage. Alternatively, it can also be used the effect can be used only once per turn. This is why it's a way of stopping you from abusing it, but it's nice that it doesn't rely so heavily on its materials for its effects, as in some cards, in order to use this type of effect, you'd have to detach all of its materials to use them, or you'd have to use a material each time you want to use one part of each of the effect, which is just as bad. This, by detaching material, it kind of does everything in and of itself when you need, and even when it's not got its materials, by sending it to the graveyard and then reviving it, you are able to just search for a Puppet Trap, adding to the consistency. Medoshi Queen Terraphrase is a attribute fairy type Xyz monster. It's a rank 5 with 2,600 attack and 2,500 effects. It requires 3 level 5 Medoshi monsters, and once per turn you can also Xyz Medoshi Queen Terraphrase. By using Medoshi Queen Terrasu, you can transfer its materials to this card. Once per opponent's turn, as a quick effect, you can detach 1 material from this card, then target up to 2 Medoshi cards in your graveyard, shuffle them into the deck. Also, shuffle up to the same number of cards your opponent controls into the deck. If this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card and sent to the graveyard, return this card to the extra. Typically, this card wouldn't be too easy to summon, as it requires 3 level 5 Medoshi monsters, and getting those out onto the field isn't the easiest thing to do. But actually, you can just use the materials off the Queen at Terrasu and transfer that over to this card. Its effect is just by detaching the material, you can take up to 2 Medoshi cards that are in your graveyard, they get shuffled into the deck, and shuffle the same controls into the deck. This is like one of those Transmigration Prophecy type cards, and in doing this, it helps remove their threats. It makes it more difficult for them to search for those cards, and a lot of the Medoshis work in that they're more consistent if you've got no cards in your graveyard than if you have any. So if you happen to have had the Medoshi cards in your graveyard before you've been able to use cards that protect those cards, it's a nice way of recovering those cards, and it's only a detach of 1 material. If you're using the other cards, then it's a consistent way of protecting it. And when this card in your possession is destroyed by an opponent's card, and that can be either by battle or by card effect, this card goes back to the extra deck. It means that it's consistently protecting your cards, and it means rather than those cards being shuffled into the graveyard, which will destruct your players even further, it considers itself to be a no-nonsense card, and it retreats itself back into the extra deck. Heretical Phobos Cobus is a Dark Attribute Illusion Xyz monster. It's a rank 4 with 2,100 attack and 1,500 defense. It requires 2 level 4 monsters, and you can target 1 effect one your opponent controls, negate its effect, then if it battled this turn, you can take control of it until the end phase. This is a quick effect. If this card has an illusion monster as material, you can only use this effect of Heretical Phobos Cobus once per turn. If this card battles a monster, neither can be destroyed by that battle. This is the first of what I consider to to be their illusion monsters that have to be Xyz monsters, and it very much plays on the fact that it cannot be destroying cards in battle. Firstly, you just take a effect monster your opponent controls, its effects are shut down. Then, if that card battles, you just get to take control of it until the end phase. So it's more useful to use this type of effect during your turn than it is to really have it as a quick effect. But you do get that bonus if you want to just disrupt your opponent from going into any of their extended combos. You're only able to use the effect once per turn, but that's fine for what you need it to be. And it's probably one of the more simplistic type of illusion Xyz monsters that we're going to see. You wait in the next couple of years, we're probably going to get far better than this. Fiendsmith's Requiem is a light attribute Fiend type link effect monster with 600 attack points, and it requires a light Fiend monster. You can only special summon Fiendsmith's Requiem once per turn. During the main phase is a quick effect, and you contribute this card to special summon one Fiendsmith monster from your hand or deck. You can target one link, non-link, light non-link Fiend monster you control. Equip this card from your field or graveyard to that monster you control as an equipped spell card. That gives it 600 attack. You can only use this effect of Fiendsmith's Requiem once per turn. Summoning condition on this card is very easy. It just needs a light Fiend monster that is consistent with the deck. During the main phase, by attributing this card, you can just instantly special summon a Fiendsmith monster from your hand or deck, and you can target one light non-link Fiend monster you control. Equip this card from your field or graveyard to that monster, so actually even when it's sent to the graveyard, it can equip itself, and it boosts that monster's attack points by 600. May not seem like much of an effect, but it's a way of recovering cards, searching for cards, and boosting attack points. Fiendsmith's Sequence is a light attribute Fiend type link monster that has 2 link markers on the bottom left and bottom right. It has 1,200 attack points. During the main phase, you can fusion summon one Fiend fusion monster from your extra deck by shuffling its materials from your graveyard into the deck. You can target one light non-link Fiend monster you control. Equip this card from your field or graveyard to that monster you control as a equipped spell with the following effect. Your opponent cannot target the equipped monster with card effects. You can only use each effect of Fiendsmith's Sequence once per turn. The summoning condition on this card isn't too difficult, as it just requires 2 monsters, so not as well of them. You're able to fusion summon a Fiend fusion monster from the extra deck by just shuffling the graveyard into the deck rather than actually from the field, so it's more useful, and it means there's an instant form of recovery. You're able to target a light non-link Fiend monster you control. This card gets equipped from either the field or the graveyard to that monster, and that monster gains the ability to be immune from targeted card effects. It's pretty useful for what it needs to be within the deck. Ragnarika Selene Snapper is a water attribute reptile type link 3 monster with 2,600 attack points. It requires 2 more insect, plant, and or reptile monsters. You can banish up to 2 monsters from your graveyard, then target that many spell trap cards your opponent controls, destroy them. If this card is in your graveyard, you can target one insect, plant, or reptile monster you control, place it on the bottom of the deck, and if you do, special summon this card. Also, you cannot special summon up for the rest of this turn except insect, plant, or reptile monsters. You can only use each effect of Ragnaraka Selene Snapper once per turn. This card's summoning conditions are quite easy because the rest of the deck works on insect, plant, and reptile monsters, so adding and splashing those cards into this deck is fine. It requires effectively 3 of those types of monsters, any variety. It could be all of one type, or it could be a mixture of any of the others. And by simply banishing 2 monsters from your graveyard, and they don't have to be specifically any of the types listed, you're able to destroy that many spell and trap cards your opponent controls. So it's a good way of spell and trap removal. If this card happens to be in the graveyard, just by taking one of your insect, plant, or reptile monsters that you already have on your field, just put it in the bottom of your deck. Remember, most likely in the deck you'll have cards that are shuffled, so it won't be sticking to the bottom of the deck for long. You're able to special summon this card, and that's fantastic as this is revival for a 2,600 attack monster. It's not a once per duel type of revival, it's a once per turn. So as long as this card has that recyclability to it, it's constantly able to use both of its effects as and when you need them, as opposed to certain cards which might have to use their effects upon their summon. The Volcanicon Concord is a water attribute spellcaster link monster. It's got 3,000 attack and its link rating of 2. It requires 2 monsters, including that link monster. It's unaffected by card effects except Valmonica cards, while you have 6 or more resonance counters on your field, and gains 1 additional attack during each battle phase for each level 4 Valmonica monster you control. Once per turn, when your opponent would special summon the monster, if you have 3 or more resonance counters on your field, as a quick effect, you can negate the special summon, and if you do, destroy that monster. Then remove 3 resonance counters from your field. The concept of the Valmonica archetype works on having this kind of angel and the devil on your shoulder, and so one helps you in terms of if you gain life points, the beneficial effects happen, and also if you take life point damage, then other effects happen based on what you need. Each of the cards, the spell cards, have the opportunity to do one or either of the effects. Some of them meet a condition that if you are able to do both, then that's also fine, and then they have linked monster versions of themselves. The 2 original cards are pendulum monsters, so one goes in the left scale and one goes in the right scale, and the link monsters are then summoned by having a certain number of counters on your field. So I think you need at least a starter of about 3, and which also makes quite a lot of sense as this card needs at least a Valmonica link monster plus an additional monster. This is unaffected by card effects, so that's fantastic as it provides it in effect immunity to anything outside of cards which are intended to affect it, which are the Valmonica cards. The field spell card can help to generate these resonance counters, so having 6 or more, it's also pretty easy to do, and it gains an initial attack during each battle phase for each level 4 Valmonica monster you control. Both the original 2 monsters are level 4, and I'm sure they will get additional support in the future, which means this can do roughly 3 attacks if you can kind of maximize on that, and that's not bad for a monster that's unaffected by card effects outside of its own archetype, as well as having 3,000 attack points. And once a turn, when the opponent just special summon a monster, provided you just remove 3 of your resonance counters, you can negate the special summon and destroy that monster. It's a good way of disrupting your opponent, and also consider that the resonance counters can work to help reduce your opponent's monster's attack points. It's a good way of eliminating threats. As of this point, this is the most effective kind of boss monster they have. They have another monster, but this has the extra level of protection about it, as well as disruption to the opponent. Madolshi Mini Meowcaroons is a Earth attribute beast type monster. It's got 2,300 and a link rating of 3. It requires 2 effect monsters, including a Madolshi monster. If this card is link summoned, you can add 1 Madolshi card from your deck to your hand. You can target 1 monster in your graveyard, special 1 Madolshi monster from your hand, and if you do, shuffle that target into the deck. Also, you cannot activate monster effects for the rest of this turn, except Madolshi monsters. You can only use each effect of Madolshi Mini Meowcaroons once per turn. The name is very much to do with macarons, which are a type of little French treat, and they're usually with egg whites. They're kind of whipped up and they're flavoured in certain ways. It's supposed to look all cutesy, and that's very much in reference to this. The archetype combines 2 aspects, usually an animal plus some sort of dessert-based reference to it, such as Queen Tiramisu. That is a queen as a person, but it's also tiramisu is the coffee-based alcohol cream dessert from Italy. It requires 2 or more effect monsters, including a Madolshi monster. That's necessary because that way it keeps within its own archetype and isn't kind of splashed into others. But given its effects, I don't think you'd want to run it in anything outside of a pure Madolshi build. As soon as this card is link summoned, you can just search for a Madolshi card from your deck to your hand, and bear in mind that could be any card. It could be a spell, trap, or monster. It doesn't specify which. And you can target a monster in your graveyard and special summon a Madolshi monster from your hand. The purpose of doing this is actually for having cards in your graveyard. That's what Madolshi don't like. They would rather those cards are either banished or sent elsewhere, usually back into your deck, as a way of then getting additional effects. They kind of stifle themselves if you've got monsters or any other cards in the graveyard. And by shuffling that card back, restrictions, there's no level limit on it. This does lock you into only using Madolshi monsters' effects for the rest of the turn, but it's not likely to affect you that badly. Cosmic Tree Mistil is a Earth attribute plant type link monster. It's a link 5 and it has 2,000 attack points. It requires 3 or more effect monsters. You can only control 1 Cosmic Tree Mistil each time your opponent special summons a monster face up during the main phase. You gain life points equal to their attack. Once per turn, as a quick effect, you can pay life points in multiples of 1,000, maximum of 3,000. This card gains that much attack. I love the design on this card, and there's a lot of information to do with a lot of builds within Europe especially that love the whole plant link monsters, so the Sun Avalon don't, and the other cards to go with it. There are so many plant monsters, the aromatherapy kind of cards, any of those archetypes, as well as some standard plant type monsters. This is trying to treat itself as its own boss monster, which is fantastic in one way, in that instantly able to kind of boost this card's attack points up by the multiples of 1,000 life points you give. So each and every turn, if you can consistently kind of give up life points, this card will only ever get more powerful. And each time your opponent special summons a monster face up during the main phase, you gain life points equal to their attack. So the more they special summon, the more they're actually punishing themselves. The more life points you give up, the more powerful this card becomes. This is a very easy strategy to kind of mitigate against, in that it's just a pure beat stick style of monster. It also requires quite a lot of cards in order to bring it out. It needs 3+ effect monsters. So even if you have, for example, a Link 3 plant Link monster, you would still need 2 other monsters already on your field, and you would have already had to have set up for that Link 3 monster. It's fine in some of these decks as they can special summon pretty easily, and you would almost need to bring out the negation and protection cards first before ever facing out this card. For example, I believe there's one that you can detach a material from it and it negates that whatever that's detached from it. So it's a rank 9 monster. By detaching, for example, a trap, you negate a trap. By detaching a spell, that's a spell that you negate, or a monster for a monster. It's an interesting form of support, and I think definitely in the future, as we get additional plant-based support, it probably is already quite busted as it is. It's topped, the plant Link deck has topped quite a few European tournaments as of late, and I can see this becoming a part of the strategy. Silhouette Rabbit is a light attribute illusion Link monster. It's a Link 2 with 1,500 attack points, and it requires 2 effect monsters. If this card battles a monster, neither can be destroyed by that battle. You can only use each of the following effects of Silhouette Rabbit once per turn. If this card is Link summoned, you can set one continuous trap from your deck with an effect that special summons itself as a monster. Also, this card cannot be used as the Link material this turn. If a card in the spell and trap zone is special summoned to the monster zone, except during the damage step, you can target one spell or trap card your opponent controls and destroy it. The summon condition on this card is very easy. It's just 2 effect monsters. It can be splashed into a number of different cards and archetypes that have a monster that is effectively a continuous trap matrix. They've got one of their own within the archetype. You have another within the Metal Reflect Slime. That is one that happens within the God decks. You have another example that happens within the Cleaforts, the Clee archetype. You have another one which is for Shadows that works. You also have generic ones. It works in any of those types of decks. You're able to instantly set a continuous trap card that happens to be a Link monster, and actually it has its own version. There's a trap monster that goes alongside with this card, which we'll discuss a bit further on. If a card in the spell and trap zone is special into the monster zone, you're able to instantly destroy a spell or trap card your opponent controls. That's perfect as it works very well within that deck. To my memory, we don't have any illusion Link monsters to discuss for now, but this is the first example we've got. And if this is the starting point, I can't wait to see how this is going to progress in the future. The only negative I see for this card is the first bit of text on it represents the same issues as with a lot of illusion monsters, in that any battles involving them, neither player's monster can be destroyed by that battle. Millennium Ankh is a normal spell card. Its effect is to show 5 Forbidden 1 monster cards from your hand, deck, and or face-up field, then special one the Unstoppable Yugioh Incarnate from your extra deck, and shuffle the face-up monsters you control into the deck, except Yugioh monster cards whose original levels are 10 or higher, and Millennium monster cards. Also, you cannot summon it for the rest of this turn. After activation, shuffle this card into the deck instead of sending it to the graveyard. This is kind of like having a polarization for this Unstoppable Yugioh Incarnate. It requires you to show the 5 Forbidden 1 cards, but that can be from the hand, the deck, or face up on the field. Very easy to do, and it doesn't require any sort of additional investment or searching into those cards. Those cards then get shuffled back into the deck, so if you have drawn any of those, that's a good way of kind of returning them. you're able to keep any Exodian monster cards that are high level, so the level 10s, and any Millennium monsters you have, and instead of this card going to the graveyard, it goes back into the deck, which can actually be searched out by some of the other Millennium monsters. Yugioh Temple is a field spell card. During your main phase, you can place one monster from your hand in your spell and trap as a face-up continuous spell. Then place one Millennium monster from your deck in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. You can only use this effect of Yugioh Temple once per turn. If a face-up Millennium monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can place it in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell instead of sending it to the graveyard. So each and every turn during the main phase, you can just place a monster from your hand in the spell and trap zone, and then you can take a Millennium monster from your deck in your spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. So that's really good, as it helps to instantly search for those Millennium monsters. And if you have one of your Millennium monsters that is destroyed by battle or card effect, instead of it going to the graveyard, it gets returned to the spell and trap zone, so it can reoccur more easily from that point than it can from the graveyard. Obliterate Blaze is a quick play spell card. One level 10 or higher monster on the field with Exodia in its original name gains these effects. You can pay half your life points to destroy as many cards in the spell and trap zones as possible. Then equip 5 Forbidden 1 monsters from your hand and or deck to this card as equip spells that each give it 2,000 attack points. Also, you cannot activate other card effects for the rest of this turn. Or if this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. This will provide your Exodia monster with quite a offensive type of effect. It grants it either the ability, you do have to pay half your life points, so it is quite a steep cost sometimes, and destroy as many cards in the spell and trap zones as possible. So I'm guessing this is yours and your opponent's. And then you equip 5 Forbidden 1 monsters from your hand and or deck to this card as quick spells that each give it 2,000 attack points. So that's an extra 10,000 attack point boost. The opponent cannot activate other card effects. You cannot activate card effects for the rest of the turn, but that's fine, as with 10,000 plus attack points, that might be enough to OTK your opponent. Think of cards such as Chaos Armatal, which gain 10,000 attack points on their turn, or Rainbow Dragon, that has the ability to send Crystal Beast monsters from the field to the graveyard to boost its attack points. Usually in those cases, you're going for the OTK or to be able to just finish off your opponent in that turn. The alternative option, it just provides piercing damage effect to your monster against your opponent. I don't see this as particularly that useful of an effect, in that you can get that from so many other cards and it's not worth doing. If you're going to do that, I would suggest using the Fairy Meteor Crush. It does the same thing. Mansion of the Dreadful Dolls is a field spell card. When this card is activated, you can add one Gimmick Puppet monster from your deck to your hand. Gimmick Puppet monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle and are unaffected by the activated effects of your opponent's monsters, except their Xyz monsters. Once per turn, you can detach one material from the Xyz monster you control, then target one Gimmick Puppet monster in your graveyard. Special next to your opponent's field in defense position. You can only activate one Mansion of the Dreadful Dolls per turn. This is a field spell that was actually used quite similarly in the duel between Quattro, and it was against Bronk and Caswell. So the two of them were fans of Quattro and didn't realise that he kind of had these number Xyz monsters, and so it's a different type of effect than the other one. They called that one based on the idea that any monster on the field cannot attack unless it's an Xyz monster, and actually all Xyz monsters gain 200 attack points. So it forced both Bronk and Caswell to summon their Xyz monsters. However, in that situation, it was very much so it could fuel the effects of his Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder. This is similar in that it's trying to do the same kind of thing, but in a different... As soon as this card is activated, you're just able to search for a Gimmick Puppet monster straight from the deck to the hand. Most field spells, which are archetype specific, give you a similar type of effect, so it's nothing different. Monsters you control cannot be destroyed by battle. That is fantastic as in terms of effect, because a lot outside of the Xyz monsters, even the Xyz monsters, like Giant Grinder only has 1,500 attack in defense position than you are into attack, and they're often, some of them have 0 attack points, to be honest. There's even some of the level 8s that have 1,000 attack points to their name. Some, to my memory, I think the newest form of support, which was a level 4, a Gimmick Puppet, has the highest level 4 attack points for the archetype. It has 1,800 attack points, and that's not even that great. And they're unaffected by the activated effects of your opponent's monsters outside of Xyz monsters, which is to do with trying to run specific themes to do with Xyz monsters. It means that if your opponent is running a deck that doesn't use any Xyz monsters, then all of their activated effects are really just shut down. It's like a skill drain, but it's a one-sided skill drain. It shuts down your opponent's effects. Whereas you're going to be running a purely dedicated Xyz structure for your extra deck. And once per turn, just by detaching your material from an Xyz monster you control, and it can be any of your Xyz monsters, you're able to take a Gibbet Puppet monster in your graveyard, and it gets special summoned to your opponent's field in defense position. Now, the reason for this is that it's meant to fuel the effects of your other Gibbet Puppet monsters. So you've got the new one that can actually instantly, upon using that effect, the Chaos Xyz version can instantly destroy your opponent's monster and inflict damage equal to half that monster's attack points. You have the Giant Grinder, which can destroy a monster that has been special, and then they take damage equal to the attack points if it happens to be an Xyz monster. And then you have the Puppet Strings, which can put these string counters on the opponent's monsters, and then at the end phase for the next turn, they self-destruct and they take 500 points of damage for each string counter attached to these monsters. Dragon's Light and Darkness is a quick play spell card. The effect is to activate one of these effects, but you can only use each effect of Dragon's Light and Darkness once per turn. Shuffle one level 8 dragon monster from your hand into the deck, and add one level 8 dragon monster with a different attribute from your deck to your hand. Target one dragon monster you control, it gains attack equal to its level times 200, or when a card or effect is activated that targets a dragon monster you control, negate that effect. The first effect is really just to help you to go into specific fusion lots that you want. So if you have 2 copies of the light dragon and you need the dark dragon, then you can switch the light dragon for the dark dragon and then go into the specific fusion monster. Alternatively, you don't really need to think of it as the light and darkness dragons, and you can consider it actually that you've got a level 8 dragon and you just want to swap it out for a different one that has a different attribute but is probably more useful for that situation. Second ability just lets your monster gain attack equal to its level times 200. So the more powerful that monster is, the higher the level, the more attack points it gains. Typically, if you're going to keep this on brand, that it targets and affects level 8 monsters, that would boost their attack points by 1,600 attack. Third ability, when a card or effect is activated that just targets a dragon monster you control, you get to negate that effect. Probably the most useful type of effect as it disrupts the opponent, and often their types of targeting effects are ones that aren't continuous. So once they use the effect, that card then goes to the graveyard, it's been a dead card, and it provides you with the protection you need for your dragon monster. Tales of the White Forest is a normal spell card. If you control an illusion or spellcaster monster, add one White Forest monster from your deck to your hand. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. You can only use each effect of Tales of the White Forest once per turn. First part of the effect, so long as you have either an illusion or spellcaster monster, you can just search out for any White Forest monster from the deck to the hand, so that's actually quite useful if you need to add consistency for the deck and it's specific to the archetype. The additional effect, if this card is sent to the graveyard to use one of the White Forest monster's effects, as they typically will require a discard of a spell trap card, this card then gets set, and it's not a case that it then gets banished after its effect gets activated. It simply has the ability to reoccur. It just means that it can only use its effects once per turn. Beware the White Forest is a normal spell card. Its effect is if you control a level 6 or higher illusion or spellcaster monster, target one card your opponent controls, destroy it. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. You can only use each effect of Beware of the White Forest once per turn. First ability, the level 6 or higher illusion or spell monsters, both of the synchro monsters happen to meet this condition. They're both level 6, and so this can work, and it just targets to destroy one of your opponent's cards. So it can be a spell, a trap, or a monster. It's not specific to any one of the 3 types. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, as is within the White Forest deck, they typically discard spell and trap cards. This card gets set back to the field, so it has a form of reoccurrence without having to run additional forms of recovery. And it's not a case of this card after activation gets banished. It simply goes to the graveyard, and then you'll have other ways of recovering it. Sorceress of the Sinful Swirls is a quick play spell card. Target one illusion or spellcaster monster you control, return that face-up monster to the hand or extra deck. Then special summon one illusion or spellcaster monster from your graveyard or banishment. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. You can only use each effect of Susurrus of the Sinful Spoils once per turn. This is a quick play spell card, so it can be activated during yours or your opponent's turn, and you target either an illusion or a spellcaster monster. That has to be returned to either hand or the extra deck, and you get to special summon an illusion or spellcaster monster that happens to be in your graveyard or that's currently banished. It's useful as a way of recovering those cards. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, as is the nature of the White Forest cards, this card is set. Like the other cards, this has the advantage of being able to be used multiple times, as well as reoccurrence through their own recovery effects. The monsters tend to recover the spell and trap cards. These cards tend to be able to recover themselves if sent from a monster effect. Fiendsmith's Tract is a normal spell card. Add one Light Fiend monster from your deck to your hand, then discard one card. You can banish this card from your graveyard, fusion summon one Fiendsmith fusion monster from your extra deck using monsters from your hand or field. You can only use each effect of Fiendsmith's Tract once per turn. The first part of the effect just searches for a Light Fiend monster, which will be the Fiendsmith Engraver. That is the basic combo starter for most of your cards. You do have to discard a card, but that's of unlimited consequences. You are able to banish this card to act as a polarization and lets you just fusion summon into a Fiendsmith fusion monster, but you do have to use monsters either from your hand or your field. It's not a combination of both. Fiendsmith Scent is a quick play spell card. The effect is if you control no face monsters, or the only face-up monsters you control are Light Fiend monsters. Special summon one Fiendsmith Fiend Light level 1 with 0 attack and defense. Also, you cannot declare attacks for the rest of this turn, except with Fiend monsters. If a face-up Fiendsmith monster you control is destroyed by a card effect, or this card is in your graveyard, you can set this card. You can only use each effect of Fiendsmith Sanct once per turn. So for starters, you do need to have no face-up monsters, or it has to be restricted to having Light Fiend monsters. You're able to generate a token, but you cannot declare attacks for the rest of the turn except with Fiend monsters. I suppose you can use this as part of the materials to bring out either the Link monster or the Fusion monster in the future, and if a Fiendsmith monster you control is destroyed by a card effect, when this card is in the graveyard, you're just able to reoccur this by setting it. That's fine, as it doesn't have usually cards which reoccur themselves then have to be banished. This doesn't have that as a downside. Emblem Salvation is a quick play spell card. The effect is to banish one face-up Centurion monster card from your spell and trap zone, then target one card your opponent controls, banish it. If this set card in its owner's control is destroyed or banished by an opponent's activated effect, you can place 2 Centurion monsters with different names from your hand, deck, graveyard and or banishment in your spell and trap zone as face-up continuous traps. You can only activate one Emblem Salvation attack. This is a quick play spell card, so it can be activated during yours or your opponent's turn. Just by banishing a face-up Centurion monster card from the spell and trap zone, you can target a card your opponent controls, it gets banished, so it's typically more difficult for your opponent to recover those cards. If the set card happens to be destroyed or banished, so typically you don't get both options, but this is one of those rare examples where you can. By an opponent's activated effect, and it can be any activation, it can be their monster, spell or trap card. You can take 2 of your Centurion monsters, they have to have different names. From pretty much most places, it's the hand, the deck, the graveyard, and or the banishment. So that as far as I'm concerned, covers all bases, and they get to be placed instantly face up as continuous traps, and from there you'll be able to spam the board with them using their own effects. Vesper Gursu is a quick play spell card. If your opponent controls 2 or more monsters than you do, they can send any number of monsters they control to the graveyard, after which you apply the following effects based on the number of monsters your opponent controls. 0, your life points become half. 1, your opponent gains 2,000 life points. 2, banish cards in your opponent's hand face up until the end phase. Or 3, your opponent cannot activate monster effects this turn. You can only activate one at Vesper Gursu. Now, I'd like to say that this card seems extremely powerful, and it's a good way of kind of dealing with what your opponent has on the field, but there are a couple of problems with that. Firstly, your opponent is going to be aware of these types of cards, and generally these are very gimmicky if they're not used correctly. Your opponent has to send any number of monsters they control to the graveyard, so they decide which of these effects are going to be applied. So they're not likely to want to give you what you want. They'll go for what option they desire. It also means that your opponent has to have 2 or more monsters than you do. So if you have no monsters on their field, all your opponent needs to have is 2. If you have cards on your field, they're just going to need to have much more than you do. And each of these effects aren't really that powerful. I mean, think of 0. Your life points become half. Okay. Outside of using a strategy where your life points kind of get switched around, or a way of lowering your life points to gain some sort of additional advantage, there isn't really any point to it. Second bit of the ability to your opponent gains 2,000 life points. To give them 2,000 life points out of hand, they can use for whatever their purposes are. Sometimes there are cards that are within their deck that cost life points, and so you're giving them a free activation from that effect. 2, banish all cards in your opponent's hand face up until the end phase. That can be more disruptive outside of cards such as the Infernity archetype or some rare exceptions, and is ill-advised. And the third ability, your opponent cannot activate monster effects this turn. I highly doubt they're going to let you be able to do that. Most likely than anything, at least keep 1 card on their field so they gain the additional life points. But it is a good disruption card if you are able to kind of manage the effect better. Trap Gatherer is a equipped spell card. The effect is the equipped monster gains 400 attack for each trap in your graveyard. You can only use each of the following effects of Trap Gatherer once per turn. After damage calculation, if the equipped monster destroyed an opponent's monster by battle or inflicted battle damage to your opponent, you can send this card to the graveyard, set 1 that trap from your graveyard. If a face-up trap you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can banish this card you control instead. I like the design on this card as it's a good way of integrating traps more readily into decks. A lot of decks don't tend to run specific traps. They may only run the generic ones, such as Infinite Impermanence, Evenly Matched, and so on and so forth, but they won't run more so their own archetype or those that suit their archetype the best. This incentivizes using more trap cards, as the equipped monster gains 400 attack for each trap in your graveyard. The more you've used, the more powerful that monster becomes. And then after damage calculation, if you manage to destroy a monster with battle or inflict battle damage, this card can just be sent to the graveyard and you're able to recover a trap card from the graveyard. It also provides you and your trap card with a form of protection, but it has to be a face-up trap card that you control. If it's threatened by card destruction, it can be protected by getting rid of this card instead. Interdimensional Matter Forwarder is a continuous spell card. You can target 1 monster on the field, then return it to the field. If your opponent activates a card or effect, you can target 1 face-up monster on the field, whose effects are negated, banish it, then return it to the field. Before resolving an opponent's effect that targets this card on the field, banish this card until the end phase of the next turn. You can only use each effect of Interdimensional Matter Forwarder once per turn. If you think of the old card, which was the Interdimensional Matter Transporter, that card's purpose was to banish one of your monsters for the rest of that turn. The reason for that is it would then protect the monster from being destroyed if you need it as part of material for bringing something out. It was used in case very much by Seto Kaiba, who used it for bringing out his XYZ Dragon Catapult Cannon, and that was only really able to be used by kind of dodging certain effects. That's another purpose and reason for using it. This is kind of an upgraded version, and it's a more consistent version. First part of the ability, just to target a monster on the field, banish it, and then return it to the field. If your opponent activates a card effect, that dodges the effect. That's exactly what you need it to. And the nice thing is, it's not leaving your field exposed to direct attacks, which was often the problem with the Interdimensional Matter Transporter. That would banish until the end phase, or as it was at that time, it was referred to as removed from play. Second part of the ability, target a face-up monster on the field whose effects are negated, banish it, then return it to the field. Reason for this is that it resets that monster's effect. So if you've used something that, say for example, special summons a monster from the graveyard, but that monster's effects are negated, in using this effect, that card gets banished and gets straight onto the field to then allow you to use that ability. It's trying to mitigate a lot of the downsides and negatives of effects that have reoccurring abilities, as those usually have kind of hard once per turn effects or typical negation-based problems. And the third ability, For resolving an opponent's effect that targets this card in the field, this card gets banished. So if your opponent is trying to threaten this card because it's finding that this card is quite difficult to actually get rid of, simply by banishing this card until the end phase of the next turn. Yes, it is quite a long wait because it's of the next turn, not of your current turn. It can be a long wait, but it's a way of preserving the card, and it's a good way of adding consistency. That's 10 is a continuous spell card. Each time a card or effect is activated except that's 10, you can place one access counter on this card. Maximum 10 monsters you control gain 100 attack for each access counter on this card. If the 10th access counter is placed on this card, you can return this card to the hand, and if you do, set from your deck one continuous trap with an effect that special summons itself as a monster, it can be activated this turn. The general idea of this card is that, firstly, every time a card or effect is activated, so this can be yours or your opponent's, it does gain these access counters, and your monsters can gain 100 attack for each of the counters, maximum 1000 attack points, as there are the build-up of a maximum of 10 counters you can have. Once 10 access counter is placed on this, simply by returning this to the card to the hand, you can set a continuous trap that special summons itself as a monster. So you can go for any of the trap monster cards, or I think there's a new trap monster card which was in a set like a couple of sets ago, or previous set, and that one was a 3000 attack, 3000 defense, level 10 monster who would be able to disrupt your opponent's effects, and it can be activated during that turn. So there are some protection effects attached to this card. Exod Fires of Rage is a normal trap card. This card is always treated as an Exod and Obliterate card. If you control a level 10 or higher Exodia monster, destroy all cards your opponent controls. If this card is in your graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can banish it and activate one of these effects. Add a 1 Forbidden 1 monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand, or shuffle up to 5 Forbidden 1 monsters from your graveyard and banishment into the deck. You can only use each effect of Exod Fires of Rage once per turn. The first part of this effect lets you just destroy all cards your opponent controls, and it doesn't matter which ones they have. It can be spells, traps, and monsters. It just wipes them all out. And although this effect, the second effect, cannot activate until the turn after this card has happened to use its first effect, it's fine, as it allows you to either add a Forbidden 1 monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. So if you're going for the original Exodia, it's a consistent form of recovery. Or you can shuffle up to 5 Forbidden 1 monsters that happen to be in the graveyard or banishment into the deck, which will help you to hopefully create the pieces of Exodia to draw into and to win using that win condition. Dark Magic Mirror Force is a normal trap card. Its effect is when an opponent's monster declares an attack or an opponent's monster effect is activated that will destroy a monster on the field. While a monster that mentions Shining Sarcophagus is on the field, destroy as many attack position monsters your opponent controls as possible. Then, if you control a Dark Magician, inflict 500 damage to your opponent for each monster destroyed. Also, for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, the first time each monster you control that mentions Shining Sarcophagus would be destroyed by battle or card effect, it is not destroyed. This is supposed to be a mirror force designed around Shining Sarcophagus, and it's meant to reference aspects of, the original Yu-Gi-Oh! As opposed to Yami Yugi. As soon as the opponent's monster declares an attack, or an opponent's monster effect is activated that would destroy monsters on the field, provided you have the Shining Sarcophagus, you can just straight away destroy as many attack position monsters they have. And if you have the Dark Magician already on your field, they take 500 damage to the opponent for each monster destroyed by this effect. This also means that each of your Shining Sarcophagus monsters that happen to feature that in its card text would be threatened by destruction from battle or card effect. It can protect it once each. This is a good way of preserving your cards, and it's quite difficult for your opponent to break predicting this. It also is better than Mirror Force in that it's not only when a monster declares an attack, but it's when a monster effect has been activated that regards to destroying a monster on the field, so it's more versatile. Service Puppet Play is a normal trap card. The effect is to target monsters your opponent controls up to the number of Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monsters you control. Take control of those monsters until the end phase. If this card is in your graveyard except the turn it was sent there, and you control a Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monster, you can banish this card, then target one Exceeds monster in either graveyard, special summon it to either field in defense position. You can only use each effect of Service Puppet Play at once. The first part of the effect is to just target monsters your opponent controls. It's equivalent to the number of Gimmick Puppet Exceeds monsters you have and take control of those monsters. The reason for this is that you can actually go into potentially either their Link monster or hopefully one of the rank monsters that they have, maybe the rank 4. The secondary ability, when this card is in the graveyard and you have a gifted puppet season monster, just by banishing this card, you can take season monster in either grave and special summon it to either field in defense position. The reason for this is that the Gimmick Puppet monsters you have, some of them, especially the new Chaos Xyz monster, the Gimmick Puppet Giant Grinder, and the Puppet Strings, all have abilities which can destroy your opponent's cards and inflict burn damage to the opponent. As you can see from the image, this was actually shown in the episode where Quattro was facing off against Bronk and Caswell. The two monsters that they had were also featured within there, and they were kind of stolen and attacked. As you can see, it's kind of gripping around those two monsters. One of them is the Antidote Nurse, which is on the right. I can't remember the name of the second monster, but that was actually introduced many years ago, far before any of this came out. As soon as they were destroyed, then the opponents would take damage equal to their attack points. Woes of the White Forest is a normal trap card. The effect is to special summon one White Forest monster from your hand or deck. Then immediately after this effect resolves, you can synchro summon that one White Forest synchro monster. If this card is sent to the graveyard to activate a monster effect, you can set this card. You can only use each effect for Woes of the White Forest once per turn. The first part of the effect just special summons a White Forest monster from the hand or deck. But once it resolves, you can then instantly synchro summon a White Forest synchro monster. So it kind of quick excel synchros your monster. If this card is sent to the graveyard to use a monster effect, as is the case with the White Forest monsters, this card just gets set to the field and then you can use its effect. Fiendsmith in Paradise is a normal trap card. Its effect is to target one at level 7 or higher light fiend monster you control. Send all cards on the field to graveyard that are not monsters. If your opponent special summons a monster while this card is in your graveyard, you can banish this card, send one Fiendsmith monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard. You can only use each effect of Fiendsmith in Paradise once per turn. The first bit of the effect to target a level 7 or higher light fiend monster you have, you can send all cards on the field to the graveyard and not that monster. So that's yours and your opponent's field that just gets kind of eradicated. As soon as your opponent special summons a monster, provided this card is in the graveyard, just by banishing this, you can send a Fiendsmith monster from your deck or extra deck to the graveyard. This helps to then hopefully recover, as they have effects which can activate from the graveyard to recover themselves. Sanguine Kaio is a normal trap card. Its effect is during the main phase, if all monsters you control are fire dragon monsters, minimum 1, and your opponent controls more monsters than you do, end the main phase. If 3 or more attacks have been declared at this turn, you can banish this card from your graveyard, draw one card. Then you can special summon any number of 10-pay monsters, dragon monsters from your hand. You can only use each effect of Sanguine Kaio once per turn. The purpose of this card is that provided you have at least one fire dragon monster on your field and your opponent has more monsters than you can, it forces the opponent to end their main phase. This means that they can't really set up any plays, and at best they have to go to the battle phase, or at worst, if they're in their main phase too, they have to go to the end of their turn, and that means it goes straight to you. If you have 3 or more attacks that have been declared this turn, that means you're able to straight away banish this card and draw an additional card. That adds to the consistency for the deck, and you are able to then special summon a number of 10-pay dragon monsters from the hand, so this adds to your overall field presence. Guardian of the Voiceless Voice is a continuous trap card. The effect is if a face-up monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, except ritual monsters, you can special summon one Skull Guardian from your hand or deck. You can send this face-up card to the graveyard, then target one ritual monster you control. It gains attack equal to the combined original attack of the other monsters currently on the field until the end of this turn. You can only use each effect of Guardian of the Voiceless Voice once per turn, and cannot activate more than one in the same chain. First part of the effect, provided a face-up monster you control is destroyed, whether that be by battle or card effect, except one of your ritual monsters, you can special summon one Skull Guardian from the hand or deck. That was a level 7 light monster which has 2000 attack and 2500 defense points. It's a very old card, and it's one that doesn't have any effects to it. You can send this face-up card to the graveyard, then you can take a ritual monster you have. It gains attack equal to the combined original attack of the other monsters currently on the field, so in doing this, you're able to combine all of those attack points that your opponent's monsters have alongside yours straight onto one ritual monster. Provided that ritual monster happens to have decent protection, it's a good way of then OTKing your opponent or finishing them off for the rest of this turn. It's quite a tricky card to use and to predict, as your opponent's not likely to want to keep this around, as they'll try and get rid of this, or they'll put themselves in a position where they don't have too many monsters, or they get rid of most of your monsters to mitigate the types of advantage you would gain through this secondary effect. Val Monica Creation is a continuous trap card. The effect is while you have 6 or more resonance counters on your field, Valka linked monsters you control gain at 1200 attack. You can only use each of the following effects of Val Monica Creation once per turn. If your opponent first summons a monster, you can accept during the damage step. Immediately after this effect resolves, link summon at 1 Val Monica linked monster. If this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, you can place resonance counters on 1 card in your pendulum zone that you can place a resonance counter on, so it has 3 resonance counters. This is supposed to help support the Val Monica archetype. Provided you have 6 or more resonance counters on your field, your Val Monica linked monsters gain 1200 attack points. That'll make them clearly over 3000 attack points, which is quite decent, as you can... The general way they work is they like to reduce your opponent's attack points, take some of their opponent's monsters, and also to kind of strip your opponent of any additional benefits they have on their field, and to potentially OTK within a given turn, or to finish their opponent in a certain turn. So you don't always know when they're going to go for game. Each of the following effects can only be activated once a turn, so when your opponent special summons a monster, you can link a summon at 1 Val Monica linked monster. This means that you can link the summon during your opponent's turn, which is quite decent. And if this card is sent from the hand, field, graveyard, you're able to place resonance counters on 1 card in your pendulum zone, so that has 3 resonance counters. This is important as most of the effects work if there are 3 resonance counters on those cards, so it helps to guarantee that those effects can then trigger. Meteora Drytron is a continuous trap card. The effect is if a Drytron card is banished except during damage step, you can attribute 1 Drytron monster, then target up to 2 of your banished Drytron cards, add them to your hand. You can reveal 1 Meteorus Drytron in your hand, ritual summon 1 machine ritual monster from your hand or graveyard by attributing machine monsters from your hand or field whose total attack equals or exceeds its attack. You can only use each effect of Meteora Drytron once per turn. This is a continuous trap card for the Drytron archetype. The first ability, provided a Drytron card is banished, you're able to attribute a Drytron monster, then you can take 2 of your banished Drytron cards and they go back to your hand, so it's an instant way of recovering those monsters. By revealing a Meteorus Drytron, which happens to be the ritual spell card, from your hand, you can instantly ritual summon a ritual machine monster from your hand or graveyard by meeting the conditions of having attack points that equal or exceed it, which is fine. So you can really use the effect of a ritual spell card without having to rely on kind of having to recover that card, and that means by continuously accessing this card, so long as you have the other card in your hand, you're constantly, each and every turn, being able to consistently ritual summon. Madolche Desert is a normal trap card. The effect is to target 2 effect monsters on the field, including a Madolche monster. Return those effect monsters to the hand or extra deck. Then you can special summon 1 Madolche monster from your hand or extra deck with attack less than or equal to the total original attack of those returned monsters. If a Madolche card is shuffled from your graveyard into the deck or extra deck, while this card is in the graveyard, except during the damage step, you can attach this card as to an Xyz monster you control. You can only use 1 Madolche Desert effect per turn and only once that turn. The first part of the effect lets you take 2 effect monsters in the field. You need to include at least a Madolche monster. Those monsters get returned to either the hand or the extra deck, depending on where they came from. And then you can special summon a Madolche monster from the hand or extra deck with attack less than or equal to the total original attack of those returned cards. So that's fantastic in one respect, in that you can determine what extra deck Madolche monster you have. Downside is those Madolche Xyz monsters that you are going to Xyz summon kind of out and cheat out from the deck do not have any materials to them. So if they've got any inbuilt effects that don't have a detach effect, then those still work. Any detach-based effects can no longer work. If a Madolche card is shuffled from your graveyard into the deck or extra deck, whilst this card is in the graveyard, you're just able to attach this card to an Xyz monster you control. So that is meant to mitigate the problems and the downside of this card. However, it's only the 1 material. It would be nice if it had a type of effect that would also attach a Midolchi monster from the deck to it, so that at least it has a couple of rounds of using its effect. Dominus Purge is a normal trap card. The effect is, if your opponent controls a card, you can activate this card from your hand. When a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that adds a card from the deck to the hand, negate that effect. Then if you have a trap card in your graveyard, destroy that card. If you activated this card from your hand, you cannot activate the effects of dark, water and fire monsters for the rest of this duel. You can activate one Dominus Purge per turn. This card gives you the opportunity to prevent your opponent from searching for specific cards. The benefit is you really have a choice how this card is activated. If it's activated whilst it's been set on the field, it means that you're not going to be limited from using those dark, water or fire attribute monsters effects for the remainder of the duel. However, if you don't run any of those attributes and monsters in your deck, which pretty much is okay if you don't, then this limitation from activating in the hand isn't a problem and you might want to just keep it in your hand. But these days, given that your hand is almost as much as a threat of being discarded as from your field, the only reason I would more so use its effect from the hand is because it can be activated during that turn. Whereas if it's set and your opponent's able to interact during your turn, which given most cases they tend to be able to do so now, then you can't really stop them from searching for those cards as it can't activate until your next turn. So you have to chop and change based on kind of the support cards you're looking at. This is part of the sub-archetype of cards, much like you've got Solemn Brigade cards, so there's a Solemn Strike, Solemn Warning, Solemn Judgment, and there's like 5 or 6 Solemn cards in total that are able to negate various types of effects. You have the Forbidden cards, which are like these quick play spell cards that either boost effects, boost attacks, negate attacks, or treat cards to be unaffected by things. And you also have the Overroot cards, like the Terrors cards, the Terror of Overroot, the Terror of Underroot, and there's another Terror card which I can't remember as of now. Then this seems to be this kind of aspect of looking at having these kind of trios or sub-archetypes of specific support that work alongside certain generic cards. Lesser to an extent is the example I give of the orange Herald of Arclight. You've got the purple one and you've got the green one. Those respectively traps, but they kind of tend to be more generic. Silu Hat Trick is a continuous trap card. The effect is, especially some of this card is an effect monster. It's Illusion at Dark at level 4 with 1500 attack and 600 defense. With the following effects, this card is also still a trap. If this card is special summoned, you can target face-up cards your opponent controls up to the number of illusion monsters you control, negate their effects until the end of this turn. Or if this card battles a monster, neither can be destroyed by that battle. You can only activate one Solo Hat Trick per turn. The card is a trap monster. It has 1500 attack and 600 defense, same as the Link monster, and it's supposed to be attached to that Silo Hat Rabbit. But this card, as soon as it's special summoned, you are able to negate face-up cards your opponent has up to the number of illusion monsters you control. So if you include this card and the Link monster it is attached with, that's a minimum of 2, and those cards have to be negated until the end of this turn. Problem is, it's only the face-up cards. You can't just negate any of those cards if they happen to be face down. Other part of the ability is the same as all other illusion monsters, that when they're involved in any battles, neither player's monsters can be destroyed in those battles, which is the downside of that. But I like that they've kind of got a 2-step combo with not only the Link monster, but you actually have a monster trap card to go alongside it. A 3-in-1 is a normal trap card. During your opponent's end phase, if your opponent has more total cards in their hand and field than you have in your hand and field cards you control, with different original names, set one spell trap card from your hand or deck that mentions the original names of all 3 targets. The idea of this is really focused on the Ojama trio, as you can see within the image, and it's supposed to be helping you to search for the Ojama Delta Hurricane. That's the card where if you've got all 3 Ojamas on the field, it destroys all of your opponent's cards. That's, as you can see, the 3 of them kind of sticking together and kind of swirling around in some sort of hurricane tornado looking thing. The problem with this is it can only be activated during your opponent's end phase, and they have to have more total cards in their hand and field than you have in your hand and field. So you need to regulate yourself to make sure that you don't have too much advantage. You also need to have 3 normal monsters that have been set in your graveyard. So you're going to have worked to get those cards into the graveyard, and they will need to be different names in order to use the banish-based effect. And just by banishing this card, you can set a specific spell or trap card that mentions those cards, but the problem with that, again, is a lot of the Yugioh cards don't necessarily name all three of these. And until you have named specific ones, or ones that can kind of say, like, we treat them as though this is how they're named, means that this might only really be useful in the case of Ojama Delta Hurricane, or that's my believing as an interpretation of the effect. Magic Colloidal Soul is an Aqua Water Attribute Tuner effect monster. It's level 2 with 400 attack and 300 defense. If a monster is special by your trap effect, except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. But if you summon it from the graveyard, banish it when it leaves the field. During the opponent's battle phase, as a quick effect, you can activate one of these effects. Immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon it using this card that you control. Or immediately after this effect resolves, exceeds summon it using this card you control. You can only use each effect of Magic Colloidal Soul once per turn. The general idea of this card is that it can be used as either a tutor for a synchro summon or for an exceed summon. It can be used and special summoned provided that you are summoning a monster by your trap effect, so a trap monster can be done through this effect, or just by summoning a monster through any sort of trap effect, that's fine. But if this card is summoned from the graveyard, it gets banished after it leaves the field. But if it's from the hand, then it's perfectly easy to do. And it could be a surprise for the opponent. Depending on the level of monsters you already have on your field, you might be able to excel Synchro into a decent level Synchro monster, as 2 is a good, decent number for bringing out higher level monsters. With the Exceed Summon, it is restricted to rank 2 monsters, as this is a level 2 monster. And because it doesn't have any adjustments on its levels, I don't know of many, if any, level 2 monsters that really interact during your opponent's turn, outside of maybe the Malfi monsters, and perhaps something along those lines. I don't think of too many cards that activate really during your opponent's battle phase. Other than that, if you know anything, put those in the comments down below and see how this card will interact from the Exceed's perspective. Volmine, Statue of the Sacred Dragon, is a light attribute dragon type pendulum effect monster. It's a level 2 with pendulum scale of 1. 200 attack and 1,800 defense. The pendulum effect is if a monster is special summoned by your trap effect, except during the damage step, you can target one card on the field, return it to the hand. Then you can special summon this card. You can only use this effect of Volmina, Statue of the Sacred Dragon, once per turn. The monster effect is when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can place this monster in your pendulum zone, and if you do, return the opponent's monster to the hand. You can only use this effect of Volmina, Statue of the Sacred Dragon, once per turn. If this card is in the monster zone is destroyed, and you can place this card in your pendulum zone. This is another card which is supposed to interact with your various trap monsters. The pendulum effect itself is if a monster is special summoned by a trap effect, hence either by a trap monster or actually a card that actually is summoned through the effect of a trap card, you can target a card on the field and return it to the hand. So it acts as an emergency compulsory evacuation device for you or your opponent, and then you can instantly special summon this card. The monster effect, just as soon as an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can place this monster in your pendulum zone. You can then return that monster to the hand, so it's a good way of disrupting your opponent, especially if it happens to be from the extra deck, as instead of going to the hand, it goes back to the extra deck. And once per turn, if this card in one zone is destroyed, you can then put it back into the pendulum zone. So it's very good at recycling itself. Kubiko is a continuous trap card. The effect is to special summon this card as an effect monster. It's a fairy earth level 2 with 0 attack and defense. With the following effect, this card is also still a trap. Once per chain, when your opponent activates a monster effect on the field that targets a card you control, as a proof effect, you can set this card in your spell and trap zone, and if you do, negate that opponent's effect. Then, if that monster has the highest attack on your opponent's field, return it to the hand. You can only activate one Kubiko per turn. The interesting thing about this card is, whilst it is a trap monster and treats itself as such, it's got 0 attack and defense, but that's not really what its purpose is. As soon as the opponent's monster activates an effect that targets any card that you have, you're able to just straight away set this card and negate that opponent's effect. If that monster happens to be the highest attack on the opponent's field, that card then gets returned to the hand. So if it happens to be an extra deck monster, that can be a problem for them as that gets returned to the extra deck, where they have to use the same level of resources to bring that card back. Often it's the case that when this card is on the field, you almost have to go straight into the battle phase, get rid of this, and do anything you want to with any additional effects during main phase 2, where this card is no longer a threat for you. The way I see it as well is it's very similar to some of the Scrap Iron cards. Scrap Iron Scarecrow and there's a Scrap Iron like Traffic Light and the Scrap Iron Statue. Each of those effects have the ability to kind of activate and then reset themselves. They can only activate themselves once during the turn, but they keep bringing themselves back. And this card really does the same thing until it's gotten rid of normally. Dipsy Fiend is a water attribute fiend type level 4 with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. You can discard one card and then declare one attribute except water. Special summon this card from your hand to either field, then this card becomes that attribute until the end of this turn. Then if you special summon this card to your opponent's field, you can special summon that one at level 4 or lower fiend monster with an original attribute, other than the declared one, from your hand or graveyard to your field. Also, for the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon from the extra deck except fiend monsters. You can only use this effect of Dipsy Fiend once per turn. This is quite a strange kind of effect. It's 1500 attack and 1000 defense. It's not bad for a level 4 monster. It's a fiend, but it looks almost like a fish. It does look a bit like, I don't know, one of those, it's not a piranha, it's the ones with the light bulbs, kind of, which trick the fish, whichever they are, I can't remember the name. Just by discarding a card, you are able to declare an attribute, so it cannot be water. And you're able to special summon this card to either field, so it can be yours or your opponent's. And then you can special summon, if this card happens to be special summoned to your opponent's field, you can then special summon a monster that's a level 4 on a fiend with an attribute that has to be different to the declared one. So if you chose Dark Attribute as your called card, then the monster you summon from this effect cannot be a dark attribute. Likewise, if you choose any of the other attributes, you're limited as to what you can get, but that's actually quite decent as it lets you search a monster from your hand or graveyard. It would be nice if it also included the deck, but I think that might be extending it too much as an effect. Those cards don't actually have their effects negated, so keep in mind you can have fiend monsters, and there's so many fiend monsters that have effects that are useful even when they're recovered. And really, what is your opponent going to do with this card? In all likelihood, you're using this during your turn. You'll plan to get rid of this from your opponent's field, so even if they were to try and use it as a rank 4 Xyz play, you will have gotten rid of this before they can ever use it as a resource. It does limit you from using any other monsters from the extra deck except fiend types, so bear in mind that if you are running this, it's not really useful as within a general water attribute deck, but rather one that intensifies and focuses on fiend type monsters. Necroquip Princess is a dark attribute fiend type fusion at level 6 with 2000 attack and 2000 effects. Requires a monster equipped with a monster card and one fiend monster card. Must be special summoned from the above cards from your hand and the field to the graveyard. You can only control one Necroquip Princess. If a monster is sent from the hand to the graveyard to activate a card or effect, you can activate one of these effects. Equip one of those monsters to this card as a equip spell that gives it 500 attack, or draw one card. You can only use this effect of Necroquip Princess once per turn. The summoning conditions on this card are a little bit tricky. One monster equipped with a monster card and a fiend monster card outside of maybe the Fiend Smith archetype. That's generally where I think this is pointed to. And it can only be special summoned from the extra by sending those above cards from the hand or field to the graveyard. You don't have to use polymerization. If a monster is sent from the hand to the graveyard to activate a card or effect, so that can typically be based on any sort of costs, like a discard cost, you're able to equip one of those monsters to this card as an equip spell that gives it 500 attack points. So this becomes a 2500 attack monster, or you have the option of drawing an additional card. I would always prefer the drawing of the additional card, which might give you more advantage than to the boosting of attack points. The League of Uniform Nomenclature Strikes is a normal spell card. The effect is to target one face-up monster you control. Equip 2 monsters with the same original name as that target from your hand, deck, and or graveyard to that target as equip spells. And if you do, it cannot attack or be destroyed by battle while equipped with those 2 cards. You cannot special summon for the rest of this turn after this card resolves, except monsters with the same original type as the targeted monster. You can only activate one the League of Uniform Nomenclature strikes per turn. The effect on this card requires you to target a face monster you control, and you straight away equip 2 monsters with the same original name as that target. In the given example, you have that for Yugioh. It has to be from the hand, the deck, and or the graveyard, and they're just treated as equip spells. Seems a little bit strange as we're pushing towards having monsters that are treated as equip spells that don't really have any business being equip spells. I can make the argument that things such as, a Crystal Beast makes sense as being a continuous spell because that's just how the deck works, but this is kind of splashing these types of effects into pretty much anything. And if you do, it cannot attack or be destroyed by battle while equipped those 2 monsters. So you're forcing your monster to become like some sort of protection for you. You're forcing them in a situation where they're useless in and of themselves, but they prevent your opponent from going into direct attacks on you until they actually get rid of those 2 cards. It's very much this sitting duck style of strategy, and I don't personally like it. It's a niche card and there are very few utilities for it. It says you cannot special summon for the rest of the turn after this card resolves, so it even cuts off your special summons, except monsters with the same original type as that targeted monster. So okay, so you go with the Ojama series, that's beast type. That's fine if you're making a dedicated deck, but unless you're really trying to narrow your opponent's cards into just affecting that card, then it's not a good idea to be running this card. And a lot of it would require you to run things such as Ring of Magnetism, which forces attacks into your monster, or to use Metal Silver Armor, which forces effects into your monster. It's just not the greatest way of dealing with things, and often these decks kind of get broken apart by just a simple thing as a Harpy's Feather Duster. 1 or 2 of those cards are enough to just clear your board and to fully just outplay you. It says you can only activate 1 of these cards per turn, and good riddance. I don't think it's going to be that useful. Kachoru's Hinamatsuri is a dark attribute machine type, level 7 with 2200 attack and 2200 defense. If this card is in your hand or graveyard, you can target 1 machine monster on the field. For the rest of this turn, you cannot special summon from the extract except Xyz monsters. Also, special summon this card, but banish it when it leaves the field. And if you do, half that monster's attack. Also, this card's level becomes that monster's. You can only use this effect of Kachoru's Hinamatsuri once per turn. This card's effect lets you target a machine monster on the field, and you cannot special summon them from the extract except Xyz monsters, so it hard locks you into machine type monsters. You're then able to use its effect from here, so it special summons itself, so that's fine, it's a level 7 monster. But you have to halve that monster's attack, and this card's level becomes that monster's. So it's a good way of you getting into Xyz monsters of a particular type, maybe focused on Xyz machine type monsters. There's a few of those, and it replicates the level of that monster. That's fine, as I think rank 10 machines the rank 10 trains would work alongside something like this. Sapphire Shrimp is a light attribute fish type synchro tuna monster. It's got a level 2, 1000 attack and 1200 defense. It requires a tuna and 1 non-tuna monster. If this card is special summoned, you can send 1 other card from your hand or field to the graveyard, then target 1 spell trap card your opponent controls, destroy it. You can only use this effect of Sapphire Shrimp once per turn. Once per chain during your opponent's main phase, you can, as a quick effect, immediately after this effect resolves, synchro summon using this card you control. It being a synchro tuna monster makes sense, as a lot of the synchro tuners tend to be they're level 2 typically. This requires a tuner and a non-tuner, so you're going to need a level 1 for each of those to bring this out. And when this card is special summoned, so it can be either when it's effectively synchro summoned or if it's revived from the graveyard, by sending another card from your hand or field to the graveyard. So this does give you the option, if you've got a useless card either on your field or in your hand, you can then get rid of that to get rid of a spell trap card your opponent controls. The secondary ability is just the same as most of the XL synchro style of plays, and isn't anything different to what typical synchro tuner monsters tend to interact like. Aerial Eater is a wind attribute fiend type fusion effect monster. It's a level 6 with 2100 attack and 2600 defense. It requires 2 fiend monsters with the same attribute. If this card is fusion summoned, you can send one fiend monster from your deck to the graveyard. If this card is in your graveyard, you can banish 2 level 6 or higher fiend monsters with the same attribute as each other from your graveyard, except Aerial Eater. Special summon this card. You can only use each effect of Aerial Eater once per turn. The purpose of this card is that it's actually based on an old card called Aerial Eater it was a normal monster. It had the same stats, typing, level, all of that, except that it was a normal monster and this is a fusion. This requires 2 fiend monsters with the same attributes, so it is a super polarization target. It can be. When this card is fusion summoned, you can send a fiend monster from your deck to graveyard. That's perfectly fine, because maybe the fiend monster has easier search and recovery from graveyard, or it has an effect that activates in the graveyard. And if this card is in your graveyard, just by banishing 2 level 6 or higher fiend monsters with the same attribute as each other from the graveyard, you can special summon this card. So it's a way of bringing this card back, and certain cards can actually revived from the banish pile, so it's a good kind of rank 6 toolbox type of effect. Mimighoul Master is an earth attribute zombie type level 4 with 1800 attack and 1200 defense. It cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects while your opponent controls any face down monsters, or you control a Mimighoul monster other than Mimighoul Master. You can only use each of the following effects of Mimighoul Monster once per turn. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add 1 Mimighoul monster from your deck to your hand, except Mimighoul Master. During your opponent's main phase, as a quick effect, you can change one face down monster on the field to face up attack or defense position. This card is meant to be the main piece, kind of like the boss monster of the Mimighoul archetype. It's got 1800 attack points, so you're thinking, how can this be a boss monster? We'll wait and see as we see the additional cards within the archetype, and you'll understand why. The first part of the effect, it cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects, while either your opponent controls any face down monsters, so if they've got a very defensive deck, then that actually supports you, or if you have another Mimighoul monster that happens to be outside this named card. Each of the following effects can only be used once per turn, and if this card happens to be normal or special summoned, you can instantly search for a Mimighoul monster from your deck to hand, and during the opponent's main phase, you're either able to change a face down monster on the field to face up attack position or defense position. This helps to trigger off various types of effects, or to put them in a position where they're not able to really do anything. Mimighoul Dragon is an earth attribute dragon type flip effect monster. It's a level 1 with 500 attack and 2000 defense. Its effect is flip if it is the main phase. Apply these effects in sequence. Destroy all face-up monsters you control except Mimighoul monsters, or give control of this card to your opponent. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in face-down defense position. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can add 1 Mimighoul spell or trap card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Mimighoul Dragon once per turn. So I see a design on this card. By giving this to your opponent, you're able to search for a Mimighoul spell or trap card from the deck to hand, so it adds to the consistency of your cards. And with the previous card, you're able to flip one of their monsters into either face-up attack position or face-up defense position, which is the effect of the Mimighoul Master, and that then triggers off their effects, which means either you opt to give this back to yourself from your opponent's side, or it destroys all face monsters that they control on their field, except any Mimighoul monsters, so it provides a lot of disadvantage for them. Mimighoul Cerberus is an earth attribute beast type flip effect monster. It's a level 1 with 400 attack and 1800 effects. The effect is to flip. If it is the main phase, apply these effects in sequence. Banish the top 3 cards of your deck, then special summon one of your banished monsters to your opponent's field in defense position, or give control of this card to your opponent. During your main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in face-down defense position. You can only use each effect of Mimighoul Cerberus. Your opponent cannot target face-up spells you control with card effects. The nice thing about this effect is, similar to the previous one, this just special summons itself to your opponent's field, and when this flip effect activates, either it gets returned to you for your field, or the other effect is it banishes the top 3 cards of that opponent's deck, and then you're able to have one of their banished monsters go into your field in defense position. So this provides you with a level advantage. And you can target face-up spells you control with card effects, so that's good because if this does come back to your field, it provides your spell cards with some form of protection. Mimigul Archfiend is an Earth attribute Fiend type flip effect monster. It's a level 1 with 0 attack and 1900 defense. The flip effect is, if it is the main phase, apply these effects in the sequence. Your opponent draws a card, send one card from your hand to the graveyard, or give control of this card to your opponent. During the main phase, you can special summon this card from your hand to your opponent's field in a face-down defense position. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can change one face-down monster on the field to face-up attack position or defense position. You can only use each effect of Mimigul Archfiend once per turn. It's able to revive itself onto your opponent's side of the field in a face-down defense position. And if this card happens to be normal or special summoned, you can change a face-down monster on the field to face-up attack or defense position, so it adjusts them. And then those effects, if they're Mimigul monsters, then trigger by being flipped face up. The flip effects in this card is either the opponent draws a card, so that'll be you. You send a card from your hand to the graveyard, so that player will have to discard a card, or that this card then gets sent back to you as the controller player. Mimigul Dungeon is a field spell card. Mimigul monsters you control that were not normal or special summoned this turn gain attack equal to their original defense. Any player who controls a face-down monster cannot normal summon monsters, nor declare an attack with monsters that special summoned this turn. During the main phase, you can add one Mimigul monster from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can only use this effect of Mimigul Dungeon once per turn. The design on this card is it being the field spell gives you justification of why they have such low attack points. The idea is that if your Mimigul monsters that you control that are not normal or special summoned on that turn, and then obviously they come back to you, they give you attack points combined with their defense points. So with the Mimigul Masters, it has 1800 attack and 1200 defense. That becomes a 3000 attack monster. The Dragon has 500 attack and 2000 defense. That becomes a 2500 attack monster. The Archfiend has 0 attack and 1900 defense. That becomes a 1900 attack monster. So even though those cards seem particularly weak, but when they're combined both their attack and defense, it justifies why they've been brought out as such. Any player that has a face-down monster that cannot normal summon with monsters nor declare attacks with monsters that was special on that turn, so it does hard lock your opponent and disrupts them from going into their plays. And consistently each and every turn you're able to either add a Mimigul monster from your deck or graveyard back to your hand. Mimigul Maker is a normal spell card. Reveal 2 flip monsters with different names from your deck. Your opponent randomly picks one for you to special summon to their field in face-down defense position, and you add the other to your hand. Then you can special summon one Mimigul monster from your hand. If your opponent special summons a monster except during the damage step, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one face-down monster your opponent controls, change it to face-up attack position or defense position. You can only use one Mimigul Maker effect per turn and only once that turn. The idea of this is that it kind of forces a decision on your opponent. By revealing it 2 flip monsters with different names from your deck, and they have to select one which they take, both of those give your opponent a disadvantage, so it pretty much isn't really up to them, and it's quite similar to cards such as then if it's 3 of the same card, doesn't matter which of those cards you choose, you're going to be given that. There's another one which works within the Monarchs that does similar type of thing, and if you choose triple of that card, your opponent really doesn't have a choice. Same with this, choose 2 of the same card, you get one, your opponent gets the same named card, that goes face down defense position, and it means that you then special summon a Mimigul monster from your hand, so it does provide you with some protection. If the opponent special summons a monster, except during the damage step, by banishing this card from the graveyard, you're targeting a face-down monster the opponent controls, so that'll be a Mimigul monster. It gets changed either to face-up attack position or defense position. That flip effect then triggers off that card's negative effects towards the opponent. The Mimigul Room is a normal trap card. The effect is to special summon one Mimigul monster from your hand or deck to your field or in face-down defense position to your opponent's field. Then you can change one face-up monster on the field to face-down defense position. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target any number of Mimigul cards you control, return them to the hand. You can only use one Mimigul Room effect per turn and only once per turn. The first part of the effect just lets you special summon a mythical monster from your hand or deck to either your field or to your opponent's field, but that has to be in face down defense position. Then you're able to change one face up monster on the field to face down defense position, so you're able to book a moon and reset hopefully another mythical monster. By banishing this card, you can then target a number of mythical cards that you control and then get back to the hand. The reason for the resetting them like this is that they can then be special summoned to your opponent's field, trigger off their effects, and to dismantle your opponent's kind of hand and deck without you having to interact too much. Blazing Bombardment Beast is a fire attribute machine type fusion effect monster. It's a level 6 with 1900 attack and 2400 defense. Requires a machine monster and a pyro monster. If this card is special summoned, you can destroy all monsters your opponent controls with 1900 or less attack. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target one monster your opponent controls with 1900 or less attack. Destroy that monster, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. You can only use each effect of Blazing Bombardment Beast once per turn. I would call this a super polarization target, but the problem is that the variety of decks that you're going to face, most likely you're not going to meet these conditions. I know Pyro's been getting a lot of support recently, but I still don't think that's necessarily a great target for this, and you can't guarantee even with machines. I know Cyber Dragons are somewhat popular, but it's not advised. There isn't any massively concurrent machine type deck that people are going for and that's screaming that's the super poly target for this type of card. When this card is special summoned, and by the way, before that, how would you run a machine and a pyro deck synergize too well? When this card is special, so it can be actually from its fusion, or if it's revived from the graveyard, you destroy all monsters your opponent controls that have 1900 or less attack. It's fine, it's like a way of disrupting kind of smaller attack monsters rather than the big ones. So it's a little bit like the opposite of a crash card virus. When this card is sent to the graveyard, you can target a monster your opponent controls with 1900 or less attack, and that monster then gets destroyed, and you inflict damage to your opponent equal to its original attack. So it does have a burn destruction, like a real destruction type of effect, which is fine, but it's nothing home about. There are so many cards that can either have their own protection cards or provide protection to other. Moon of the Closed Heaven is a light attribute fiend type link monster. Its links are the top right and the top center, and it's link 2 with 1200 attack. It has 2 effect monsters as a requirement. You can target one face-up monster your opponent controls this card points to. This turn, if you link a link 5 monster using this card you control, you can also use that monster your opponent controls as a material. You can only use this effect of Moon of Closed Heaven once per turn. This is a junior version of the other card, which is like 5 monster. This also has the ability to use one of your opponent's cards, monsters that happens to be pointing to this card as part of the requirements to summon it. But bear in mind that this can be conditional, and it does require specific prep and a specific style of deck to rely upon. But it's a mini version of the Underworld Goddess. Spell card Monster Reborn is a quick play spell card. The effect is to target one monster in either graveyard, special summon it to your field, but for the rest of this turn it cannot attack, and neither player can activate its effect. You can only activate one spell card Monster Reborn per turn. This is meant to be in reference to the anime where I believe it was Yugioh who is facing off against Arcana, and that was in the Battle City tournament. That was the second of the rare hunters that he faced off against. Both of them used a Monster Reborn at the same time, and they both brought their Dark Magicians back, and they attacked each other and they destroyed each other. That was what this is referencing. It simply has the ability to target a monster in either graveyard, and it gets special summoned to your field. It's similar to Monster Reborn in that it allows for access to any card in either graveyard, but for the rest of the turn, that monster cannot attack, and if it does have an effect, it cannot activate that effect. So it does limit you for the duration of that turn. Ideally, if you use this type of effect, for example, during your opponent's main phase 2, then you can always use this, during your next turn. Spell card Soul Exchange is a normal spell card. The effect is immediately after this effect resolves, tributes control, but it cannot be tributed at this turn. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, your opponent can apply this card's preceding effect. You can only activate one spell card Soul Exchange per turn. The great thing about this card is it's meant to be like Soul Exchange, but it only activates during your turn. It's not a quick play spell card, and it is a little bit limited in certain respects in that you're able to tribute summon the monster and as well as a certain card that your opponent controls. But bear in mind that if you have any other cards on your field, then your opponent can also use this effect against you to tribute one of their higher level monsters. The benefit is if you don't have anything else on your field, then the card that you initially tribute through this card's effect cannot be used as tribute, so that's a way of kind of disregarding the negative side of this effect. But I still would rather run the March Soul 4th card as it's more versatile. So this concludes what is effectively the entire list for the set, and that is the entire list for Infinite Forbidden. I'd love to know in the comments down below which is your favourite card, what are your top 5, and any other opinions you have on the set. Have you pulled anything decent? Make sure to like the video, it really helps support the channel, and it would be great if you could consider subscribing. Thank you.